Welcome to my new series called The Astrologically Insane for Killers and Serial Killers Natal Charts. I have always been fascinated behind the darker psychology behind people and why we do the things we do and just what drives us to act on animalistic tendencies. I also was just very fascinated and interested in knowing whether or not killers and serial killers have things in common and what is the correlation between them and why perhaps just kind of giving us more of an insight to them as a person and maybe why they maybe could have behaved or acted in certain ways. I also want to just kind of keep in mind that this is in no way me glorifying Ted Bundy or trying to bring Ted Bundy down in any way. It's just me simply looking at his natal chart, examining it and understanding it and interpreting it in the way that I have perceived it. Keep in mind as well, Ted Bundy is a real person. He obviously is multifaceted. He has his own different sides to him. Me doing this is just a summarization of him as a person. It is not the full picture of who he is as a person. So please do keep that in mind as we go through his natal chart. So, just a little bit of an understanding about who Ted Bundy was. He is one of the most notorious killers ever known, and he is suspected to have killed around roughly 30 to 100 people. Now, with Ted Bundy, we actually really didn't know how many people he actually killed, mostly because Ted Bundy only admitted to 30 kills, but we believe that there is definitely more. And even the way that Ted Bundy phrased his answer even kind of led people questioning whether or not we were even able to even identify, let alone find some of the bodies. There, Ted Bundy was definitely an interesting man, to say the least, and he obviously had a type. He loved brunettes with long hair, and he would just kind of find girls that he found was attractive, and he's even in interviews and things that he has stated, he said that he couldn't almost help himself. There was like a urge, there was like this hunger that he couldn't feed. And that was kind of the way that he would describe this urge. But then once he murdered, once he did everything that he did, that all of a sudden that hunger would kind of subside and he wouldn't feel like that anymore, and he felt like he was more like himself. He would kind of act as if he went into psychosis and out of psychosis, the way that he would describe it. And it was like he would kind of indicate that as if he almost had no control. It was like as if he was lacking impulse control with his victims. So I thought that was very interesting as well. So if we were to look into Ted's natal chart, we would find that he has quite a few placements in Sagittarius and Scorpio, as well as Leo. But his ascendant is in Leo. His sun and his moon actually are both in Sagittarius. His Mercury is in Scorpio. His Venus is in Scorpio. Mars is in Sagittarius. Jupiter is in Scorpio. Saturn in Leo. Uranus in Gemini. Neptune is in Libra. Pluto is in Leo. The North Node is in Gemini, and his Chiron is in Scorpio. So I'm going to start breaking it all down for you. What does that even actually mean? And what is some characteristics that we kind of can see that he exhibits, that it kind of shows in his chart? So having Leo in the ascendant rising, a lot of the time these people are very charismatic, really charming. They have a lot of cat-like features because the ascendant is where we get our physical appearance, or at least that is one of our first signs of physical appearance. And a lot of the times people with Leo in that chart, they usually either have like really their hair is either really prominent where it's either unique or different or it stands out or it's big. Um, Leo's also in ascendant can also at times come off like a leader or somebody that people just naturally want to trust or kind of even like there's something about a Leo that kind of has that demanding of presence that a lot of people get drawn to. Leos are very magnetizing, so to have Leo in the ascendant, oftentimes they can be seen as very charming or very big, and even the way that people like when they talk they can become very animate with this type of a placement because again it's like the physical appearance, so you might see like they have more of a cat eye, like a natural cat eye, or like I said, things with their hair. But yeah, Leos when you have rising in Leo, a lot of the times people will see you as somebody who could be charismatic or confident, or it can even be in a negative way, as some people might see you as arrogant and boasting and bragging. So it just kind of depends on the person that's perceiving you, as well as even perhaps your own behavior and how you respond, whether it's in a positive or a negative way. A lot of the times, he might even expect like royal treatment. He might expect people to just say yes to him. A lot of times, with people with ascendant in Leo, one of the things that they have to learn at times in their life is that you don't always get necessarily what you want, or you can't always get the best outcome. But that's not obviously, it's just every ascendant has its own set of positives and negatives, and we're always constantly learning. So that could be one of the things that a lot of people who have that placement might need to start learning and appreciating. A lot of the times, too, pride can be a huge thing for people with this type of placement. Maybe having a fear, or maybe it might be afraid of being seen not as perfect sometimes. A Leo's put on performances. A Leo usually in the house, the fifth house, it kind of, which is Leo's domain. Um, it kind of shows that showmanship, right? This could be somebody who could be a good car salesman. They're really good at showing certain traits that might lower people's ambition a little, right? Makes people want to kind of trust you more. Having Leo in this placement, you might feel the pressure of feeling like you need to be perfect all the time, or feeling like you need to perform all the time, or feeling like there's almost like this sense of always needing to be the fun one, or always needing to be the one that's always doing something. Like people with Leo and ascendants can have that habit or have that tendency to fall into that habits that could make that happen. A lot of the times, too, they can come off a little bit childish in their demeanor, or they might even look really young, because people with this type of placement, they have that childish, cheerful kind of energy about them. And that's another thing too, is there's just something about them that seems like a lot of fun. Maybe you notice people and things kind of gravitate towards them. They also might fall into that self-centeredness a little bit. Maybe, especially if they're really beautiful too, they could just attract so much from the physical that they might not develop certain aspects. Although there's this sense and need of being independent with a lot of people with Leo and ascendant. So there's this everybody usually gives to me or nobody gives to me, right? They can fall from either extremes or just kind of in between. But a lot of the times, these people want to develop this independency, so they have to feel like they need to prove themselves. So that's something that some people with this ascendant rising sign in Leo might struggle with a little bit. But one of the things that really affects a Leo rising is getting the love and praise that they feel like they need and deserve. Especially Leo risings might want it's like they need that accolade. They need that, hey, you did a good job. They need that sense of acceptance, but they need that feedback in order to feel satiated usually. So a lot of times, again, there's that putting on that show, putting on that energy, but again, there's all these positive things with it too. Like a lot of the times people with Leo rising, they come off very confident and their eyes are usually gorgeous or mesmerizing in some way, and like they have these features about themselves that just like draws your eye to them. So it's like they are very mesmerizing. And there's something about them that makes you want to almost somehow give to them or cater to them. Because there's almost like this a lot of people when they experience this, it's almost like they want to be like, I don't know if I can trust you, right? Because there's this need to want to give to the Leo rising. So a lot of times people have a hard time saying no to Leo risings. Um, so yeah, now we're going into his sun in Sagittarius. Now, a lot of people with the sun sign in Sagittarius are really witty people. They're very intelligent. Sagittarius is actually one of the most intelligent signs in the zodiac. It not only is intelligent when it comes to think about the bigger picture of things, but also there's this expansion that comes with Jupiter. There's this never-ending quest of learning. There is this exploration that comes with Sagittarius. And a lot of the times, people who have the sun sign in Sagittarius, and especially the moon as well, feel this urgency to want to travel, want to move, want to do things. And even if they stay in their hometown, they're still wanting to explore like restaurants or different places, different things. A lot of times Sagittariuses are not afraid to experiment with certain aspects of their life because they're a little interested to see like what's out there and what they can learn. Because a lot of times Sagittariuses want to experience life, but also wants to learn the structures of why things are the way they are. And in this, Ted Bundy is extremely intelligent. We'll get more into it as we get into the chart, but a lot of these things, like he's very curious, he's very smart, sometimes he has that tendency of acting out on his desires. And a lot of times Jupiter, which rules Sagittarius, Jupiter is a very expansive planet, but there's also this, in a lot of ways, it's very similar, I feel like, to Venus, but not in the sense that, like, it's, because they both kind of share a sense of materialism, but it's not even that, it's this desire that I feel like Jupiter and Sagittarius kind of holds, that it's this desires that's inside that drive them to try new things, to go out and experience new parts of life. And a lot of the times these people are more optimistic. They like to think of the brighter side of things, or there's this sense of like, I'm the exception almost, right? Like Sagittarius is just, they find where they want to go, and it's like the same thing with the arrow, which, a lot of people, if you understand astrology, you know that Sagittarius is the centaur with the bow, or it's just the bow and the arrow. And it's because once they are fixated on a point, and once they pull that quiver back and they release, they're there. They're going there. And it's like a lot of times Sagittariuses can be stubborn. Because in a lot of ways they're very stubborn because once they have a course set, they want to meet that expectation. They want to get there. They want to experience it. And a lot of times Sagittariuses, they will keep going through life learning different lessons because they want to see it to the end, or they want to kind of see where it goes. And they might go a little further before they decide, you know what, no, I'd rather turn back, or I'd rather change course. So a lot of times Sagittariuses, they feel like they need to kind of like they feel like they need that sense of freedom, but they also they're more open-minded than most people. And sometimes the negative side of Sagittarius, it can be that they might ignore the desires of others, or they might just run away from problems. Sometimes they might even ignore life's harshest reality, the reality of life sometimes, because sometimes Sagittarius is, because they're so optimistic, or because they usually have the bigger picture thinking, sometimes they forget about the little details that trip them up. So these can be like negative things that could happen with this placement in Sagittarius. But in a lot of ways, you kind of get to learn a lot about Ted as well. And, honestly, in a lot of ways, he does have a lot of Sagittarius traits. And even a lot of the times, too, like the way that he expresses and moves and does things, you can kind of tell that there's, like, he thinks a little bit before he speaks. So his sun is in the 4th house. Now, the 4th house, that is Cancer's domain. So a lot of the times, people who have the sun in the 4th house, the sun is your soul. The sun is who you kind of are in your truest core, and it's not only by one sign, right? It's just, this is where you are choosing to, like, this is what your soul is the most comfortable in at that time. And basically, it's kind of almost your truest child, your truest inner self, right? When you were born, before anyone told you what was right and wrong, before social cues and social things started happening and it molded you to become a different person over time, the sun is kind of like you at your purest essence the day that you were born, essentially, before you were like programmed to think and be a certain way. So a lot of times people, wherever your sun is in the chart, you want approval and applause there. And not only that, but the sun is so big that it cannot help but highlight that part of the chart, because that is where you might seek the most validation. That is where your ego is the most strongest. That is where you feel is a very important key and facet of your life. And not only that, but as we get older, oftentimes if we have started to mature in our life, we start to go back almost to the sun. And that's where we start to find ourselves again. So it's a very important placement. And where the sun is, the sun is the center of the universe. All the planets, they rotate around the sun. The sun is a huge focal point of your life. And for Ted, that was family. And that makes a lot of sense, because Ted always talked very highly about his family. And there is a lot of mysteries there. There is a lot of stuff that I know for a fact that at one point I know bugged Ted. And another thing as well is looking into the sun in the 4th house a little bit. You start to see that, his social, the way that he communicates, the way that he talks, his attitude, some of those things were formed definitely at a young age, because the sun is needing that applause, that approval, that praise. It's the sun, it's like we want people to appreciate us. We want people to acknowledge us, right? And for him, that would have been the focal point, is wanting that acknowledgement from his family. And, he could have even learned a lot of different things. It's possible that he learned things culturally or different cultures. He could have been fascinated with family heritage and where he came from and why he was there. That his family's life shaped his life. And he, in multiple interviews, has stated that his family was never the issue. But, I will say, I don't want to have too much of a strong opinion about this. He said that he was never abused in any way, nothing like that. The sun in the fourth house. He can sometimes have a cynical view on family at times and can have like a very strong influence from his parents. And, they talked about how Ted was really attached to his grandpa. And, I'm sure that in a lot of ways things did really shape his reality. And, he could have been very involved in a lot of family situations. And like I said, there could be, because having this placement there could be attachment to family members. And like they said, he was very attached to his grandpa. So in a lot of ways, having this, he says he grew up in a good home, and I will not argue that. I wasn't there, obviously, but I am just stating that having these types of placements here and everything kind of, just knowing that he didn't know that his sister was his mom, there could be a sense of him, it's shaping a little bit maybe to why Ted was the way that he was. Now we get into the moon in Sagittarius. And having the moon in Sagittarius, and you have to think the moon is your thoughts, it's your feelings, it's kind of more your internal world, right? And the moon really does indicate where you are, and even just your thought process. A lot of times people think differently. And when people have, different moon signs, they have been shown to like think differently in a lot of different ways. So, expansive mindset, because there's just this free visionary belief, because a lot of times, again, Sagittariuses, they push the barriers, they kind of push the boundaries, they say, how far can I take this, where can I go with this? So they are always wanting to explore and always wanting to see what's out there. And so for him, it's this mental stimulation that he needs. It's always needing to find something new or try something new. There's always like a sense of passion for learning. And he might even have gone into, like, for one, I will say, going into law makes sense. A lot of times people who are in the law enforcement or just work there at all in government, a lot of them have Sagittarius and Libra placements, and it makes sense. And he loves to learn. So for him, he probably really got into psychology. He probably got into religion, philosophy. He probably loved to study different cultures. Like a lot of the Sagittarius things, like travel, learning, philosophy, law, religion, learning different new random things, probably did bring him to become a lot more knowledgeable, but also would make sense to parts of why his personality was the way he was. He even became his own lawyer in court. He defended himself. And it's because he dropped out of law school. And, it's kind of funny because inside his natal chart, as we go down, it will explain why he had one aspect in his chart that even says basically that having this aspect could slow down or altogether halter your knowledge, or getting your degree, or being able to proceed a class. So I thought that was very interesting. But, because a lot of people who have Sagittarius in the moon can be very funny. They're very witty, they're very funny, they're very charming. There is something about them that seems very generous, but also like very easygoing. A lot of people who like to party can be in Sagittarius placements, because they are kind of that fun, like, look at me, because they are fire, the fire energy. It's like it's very magnetizing, it's very pulling, it's very telling. And I feel like Sagittariuses a lot of the times have this some kind of charm to them where you can't help but at least notice them in the room. You can't help but at least remember them. So to have those in his chart probably did show some form of maybe he could have at times either been overlooked or have always been noticed. So to have the moon in the fourth house, there's a good chance that there's a political career, right? Because political careers are favorable with this placement. Because again, a lot of the times, a lot of politics or a lot of people that are in the political system so happen to have the moon in the fourth house in Sagittarius or some type of aspect reflecting back on something similar to that. So a lot of people are very favorable in this placement. And it even kind of, he was, like I said, really wanted to become a lawyer. And I feel like for a lot of you guys too, having this placement, he might have the ability to inherit things from his own mother. More likely to be able to inherit things from his mom. Change is both desired and feared all at the same time with this type of placement. Wherever the moon is, sometimes there is uncertainty there. Because it is your internal world, oftentimes when we experience things on the external, it can shake the way we view things. So people do not like family changes with the moon in the fourth house. Anywhere the moon is, wherever the changes start to occur, they have a really hard time handling the environment in which that is available. So anytime family changes or he having to change homes, those are things around his house, like changes around his house, changes around his family. Those things can affect him very deeply. And he puts a lot of importance on family. And it's kind of interesting is even Ted, even towards the very end, he still kind of did put a weird, like, I wanted to have a family. Like, he wanted the whole American dream, right? The family with the white picket fence. And it was very interesting to see that with such a notorious killer still having that, like, oh, but I want a family. And when he was with his girlfriend and she had her daughter, they both were in shock when they found out what Ted has done. She was suspicious for a while because the description and everything that happened and the way he was behaving led her to kind of say, you know what, I think this might be Ted. So she was the one that tipped the cops. But what was so interesting is her and her daughter were both shocked and stunned. They were like, I never knew Ted to be that way. And he never showed a sign of aggression towards them. They said he never hit them. He never was like horrible to them, but sometimes he would just kind of disappear, Ted was known to just kind of sometimes leave. So again, always on that move, always traveling, always going. He was convicted in 7 different states of murders. So he did travel quite a few times in between people. And that makes sense given the placements that he has in his chart. So, already we're seeing patterns with the behavior that he was kind of showing in a lot of ways, reflecting that on the chart. And that's kind of something that he really wanted, was to settle down. And, a lot of times too, people who have the moon in the 4th house, a lot of the times they're either really good realtors or they aspire themselves to work really hard because owning a home is really important to them, right? A lot of times, people who have the moon in the 4th house, they need to have that stability and they need to know that the house is theirs. Like something like that. They're very protective of their home. So as we break in a little further down into his chart, we're seeing here that he has Mercury in Scorpio. Now, anything with scorpionic placement, whether that's in the 8th house whether you got Pluto there, and even Mars. Nobody talks about this, but Mars is co-owned by Pluto, and so yeah, Scorpio and Aries share Mars. There's a darker side to Mars that is Scorpio's domain. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but it's in his Mercury, and Mercury is affiliated with Gemini and Virgo. And that means that in a lot of ways, he's witty, he's smart, there's a lot of things to it, but he's sneaky. This man can hold a lot of secrets. Having Mercury in Scorpio, you're either good at keeping other people's secrets or you're really good at holding your own secrets. And even to this day, we still have no clue how many victims he truly had. We still have no clue a whole lot about his family situation. He would just kind of chalk it up to say he had a good family, and he never really went too much into detail about his childhood. And it just seems like for him, he had a way with words that were often like a riddle, or kind of things that were said but not. It was like saying it but without truly saying it. It's like you're needing to decipher his words. You're needing to see what lurks beneath the surface. You can't take what Ted says almost at face value. People who have Mercury in Scorpio, they are very slick with the tongue. They are very easy to mistaken. They're very easy to trick you. And and sometimes it's tensional and sometimes it's intentional. It's just the way that's more natural in his way of speaking, having this type of placement. That's just what is more comfortable for him. So a lot of the times when you have Mercury in a water sign, you can hear the emotions in their voice. It's very hard for people to hide it. Having Scorpio in this, however, you can kind of hide the emotion a little bit, but you still can see or still read it through his body language and even through certain tones in his voice. And you can tell, a lot of times too, this is interesting that, Ted Bundy had very bright blue eyes. And, I feel like for some people who have that type of placement, their eye colors can be very striking, very different, very unique, or just very bright, or just they stand out. And that's one of his ways. He can be a little bit hypnotizing in that way. Maybe just staring into his eyes, can really hypnotize a person. Listening to his voice, sometimes, it can be very soothing or very aggressive, right? Sometimes he can come off very confrontational, and when so, can intimidate others. People could have used his own secrets against him at some point in his life. Now, especially if this was family or if this was people that he wanted approval from, there can be some there could be issues in there. But a lot of the times, people with Mercury in Scorpio is a very traumatic experiences. Scorpio is not a very comfortable placement to have. So he could have either had a stutter or some kind of speech impediment. He could have been slow to talking at a very young age. Maybe he wasn't the one that was very quick at talking, because having this type of placement here, there can be some dark sides to talking. It could be that he could get in trouble for speaking his mind and being punished for it. It could be that he would have people keep things from him, which you see later down the line in his natal chart that is definitely the case. You can find people with this placement to not want to be entirely honest because they've been ridiculed, they've been threatened, they've been blackmailed. You name it. So many people with this placement can find it very hard to be upfront, to be truly honest, to be really open when it comes to communication. However, people with this placement can be very poetic, can write amazing poetry, or can be really inspiring once they get over the trauma. And in fact, once they get over trauma from being ridiculed and made fun of, or having aggression thrown at them for their words and for their speech, once they can get over it and they can evolve, they are like so charismatic and they are so alluring. And there's something about them that draws people to them. And a lot of the times, too, they have a very sharp tongue. It's a very double-edged sword with their communication. And they're very good at digging up secrets, right? They're very good at figuring things out. And a lot of the times, people with this placement understand the nature of humans, right? Human nature, why they've seen dark parts of humanity, and they've been lied to, or have been berated, or have been all kinds of different things have come out that they could have experienced in their lifetime with this type of a placement. So to understand this a little bit further, you might understand a little bit of maybe the way Ted thought. Oftentimes when you are in an environment, or when you've been lied to, or you've had enough deceived, it can kind of lead to acting out behavior. It can lead to maybe not seeing humanity in the bestest of light. And what's interesting too with having Mercury in Scorpio, people either love you or they hate you. It's really not very often that you get people that are in the in-between, where I like them and hate them. A lot of the times it's either one extreme or another extreme that these people with this placement will oftentimes find themselves in. Because a lot of the times they might say something or do something that can be perceived as taboo. And a lot of people might want to reject that. And on the other side, those people are like, dang, I appreciate that. That's really raw and real, and might be more drawn towards that. So there are differences when you have this placement, because Scorpio is such an intense sign and such an intense planet and house. It's all about what lurks truly in the depths, and a lot of the times that scares people. So there's a lot of negativity and a lot of fears that come up being around people or being in that placement. Oftentimes as well too is a lot of people might have misunderstood Ted growing up, or might have just never truly understood his behavior, or why he would think or say or act in certain ways. And maybe he could have even been chastised for being sensitive, for even having emotions, or for even speaking up about how he feels. So these kinds of things could have really impacted his psychology and the way that he could have even probably communicate or even connect with another human, right? Another person. There could be some kind of disconnect there because of maybe having too much trauma. Again, I'm not a psychologist or anything. This is just my observation from what I've heard about his cases and what I've seen in his tapes, as well as what I'm seeing in the natal chart, and kind of me coming up with my own conclusion. So here we have Mercury in the 4th house. Again, family is very important to him. He has a stellium in his 4th house. He has so many planets that are just wedged in the 4th house that's why I have such a hard time not believing that his family really had to have shaped the way Ted behaved, thought, acted, perceived things. At least his neighborhood had to have also have been a huge impact in his life. On one of his interviews, he talks about how in the neighborhood, sometimes people would throw away stuff and they would dig up the trash and they would find like dirty magazines. But he would say things like how one or two of them would be more rough, would be a little bit more harder, right? So that he said that shaped him was the pornography. He blamed a lot of his actions on porn, but then also retracted back that statement and said, well, I'm not blaming it just on pornography, but I think that that's a pretty big key. And as we go down further into his chart, we will see how his sexuality got shaped. And you know what's very interesting too is having that in Scorpio and in the fourth house, Scorpio is a very sexually charged energy, is a very sexually charged house, planet, and everything that is related to Scorpio. And a lot of the times it's deeper than just sex. It's more deeper than that. It's intimacy. And that's how, it really can impact. So let's kind of get more into it. So in his home, there could have been a very high chance that there were a lot of books in his house or a lot of different intelligent conversations that could be going on at the dinner table or just in his home in general. A lot of the times people who have Mercury in the fourth house learn a lot of different things and are more likely to be in an environment that is very impactful in his learning. Having Mercury in the fourth house, a lot of the times too, you are very influenced by your parents and the actions and the value system of the family really would impact the way you perceive family, how you view family. And I just thought that was so interesting to think about, though, that with his girlfriend and his girlfriend's daughter, he was never mean to them. At least that's what they said. It really did throw them off that it was him. And I'm wondering if maybe in some way, maybe he could have did a split where he was a family man and would never hurt them, but then there was that violence that he had, that urge to kill, and it's almost like he just had two separate lives. And he didn't split, he never crossed one or the other, right? It was like he would kill and go on a gruesome spree and, have his way with people and then come home and be loving and caring and kind and sweet and all family oriented. And it's crazy. It is so crazy. But, it's interesting because if you look at his chart, there's a split between here Scorpio and Sagittarius, but again, all those planets just wedged right into the fourth house, and then him saying, well, his family had nothing to do with him, and I'm not blaming the family, but what I'm saying is to have that many planets, that's a huge stellium right there. To say, because that really is a huge impact. That the more planets there are in one place, the more energy, the more time, thought, the more things that you will put into that placement, into that house. So I really do believe that his family had to have had some kind of an impact on his development and even in the way that he perceives family in his actions. He proposed to a woman in court and married her and had a kid in jail. Like, he was family oriented. He wanted a family before he died, and he got his daughter. So, I'm just saying Ted Bundy really was family oriented. And I think that's another reason why it was so weird for people, because he looked like a normal average guy. A lot of people found him attractive and charismatic, and he seemed so family oriented. But then there was this dark side to him, this part of him that nobody ever even acknowledged or ever even thought existed. So it's insane to see how much of an impact his family and how much of an impact wanting a family really has done to him. But also, again, there is this side of him that even in interviews, said he had a hard time controlling, or that he had a hard time truly understanding. And I think I kind of get it here. Also, having a Scorpio in your fourth house is insane, because a lot of the times people who have the Scorpio in the fourth house, there's a lot of family secrets. There's a lot of things that are kept from you, from your family, that you have no idea about, that could actually make or break your life. Like, it's insane to see how many people who've had Mercury or anything in Scorpio in the fourth house would have bizarre stories to say when it comes to family, because it's just, there's so much there. Now, one thing I will say though, having Mercury in the fourth house, this means that he has a very excellent memory. A lot of the times people with Scorpio in Mercury, or even in the fourth house, the fourth house is like all about memories, nostalgia, right? It's our fundamental way of growing up. Our family is what helps shape us, is what helps us become a person. And so in order to, it's kind of like having really good memory here. But, having that Scorpio placement there, he can have a tendency of fixating on past events, or fixating on something somebody could have said or done to him, right? Maybe he has a hard time letting certain things go, because there is a sense of fixation anywhere you have Scorpio or Scorpio placements in your chart. You will have a tendency of fixating on that more than perhaps the other average people, because that anywhere Scorpio is, there is this it's almost like this consistency, like you're constantly feeding yourself and wanting to get more, or you fixate on it, you focus on it, or there's just this obsession, right? A lot of people with Pluto or Scorpio placements have weird obsessions. So this is another thing as well, is people with this placement can be interested in history and politics. They can be interested in law. They can be interested in wanting to pursue further goals. So he's very interested in these things. Now, I will say this. His Mercury is in retrograde. And I want to kind of get into it a little bit. Retrograde is an optical illusion in the sky. When they say a planet goes retrograde, what it's saying is it does about half a year. So about 6 months into the year, a lot of planets will go retrograde. And what that means is when you look up in the sky, it almost looks like it's kind of further away, or that it's going backwards, when really in reality, it's still moving. It's just moving in a different altitude. So the altitude shifts every 6 or so months. And that's a fluctuation that happens. And it gives people this illusion that it's moving in a weird way. And so a lot of times when people have retrograde in their chart, what that means is that sometimes they learn in unconventional ways, or they have to take a minute to relearn something a couple of times before actually getting it. So there can be some delays with retrograde in your chart, but once you do get over certain things, they become either masters at that skill, or they grow exponentially than the average person because of that. So, a lot of the times it's very common to see retrograde in people's charts. A lot of people have it. I do as well. However, I will say Ted does have quite a few retrogrades in his chart. He has 4 retrogrades. So it's very interesting because, a lot of times people who have Mercury in retrograde, he might have struggled to learn. He might have really struggled with speech. He may have struggled with communication. There could have been a delay. Like I said, when he was an infant, maybe he didn't speak until he was 1 or 2 or 3. Maybe there is something about the way that he was that might make people kind of look at him sideways when he would talk. Some people are born with a stutter, or like some kind of an issue with some kind of speech, or even something wrong with their mouth, right? Sometimes people look at people with Mercury in retrograde in their natal chart and be like, what's going on? Like, are you okay? Like, their teeth could be messed up, or, they might have a cleft lip, or, there's some kind of indication that might draw towards his speech. And it's because there is a sense of learning. A lot of times retrograde, you kind of go against the grain, and so you're different than most people in that category. You're more quirky, right? Retrogrades bring out a quirkiness in certain people, and so maybe the way he thought, the way he communicated could have been off. It's kind of like having Saturn in this placement. It's kind of like having Capricorn in Mercury, because sometimes there's that you need to grind, the more you talk, the more you communicate, regardless of what's happening, the better you'll be, right? You need the practice. Like there's something about needing to practice and grind away at certain things in order to get better at it. So there is this needing to understand and make little changes to better yourself, so that way that once you get a little older, once you grow out of it more, you become a lot you can almost be skilled at it, right? Some people with Mercury in retrograde are really, really intelligent people. It's just the way that they thought is different than the average person. So some people really can be bullied or really can be hurt having this placement there. So Ted's life, his IQ is actually 136, one of the top 2%. And yeah, he was going to be a lawyer, went to law school and everything, but as we go into it, we'll kind of see somewhere in his chart, and it will kind of indicate why he had to drop out. And it's kind of interesting too to think that he had such a high IQ. He's a very intelligent man, and even the judge said when he was sentencing him to life in prison and on death row, he said, it was such a shame, you had so much potential. And he did. He had a lot of potential. He was a very intelligent man, but unfortunately he just kind of, I think that mental illness and other things could have led to maybe Ted going down the path that he went down, or he could have done so much different things with his life. So having Venus here in the 4th house, it's all about comfort, right? Wherever Venus is all about luxury and comfort and wanting to be kind of pampered in that house. So he could have grown up feeling like maybe there could, and what's so interesting too, to have some of these placements that he has here, it's like, maybe at times he really could have been treated really well, really good, he could have had them cater to him or to give to him, there's possibilities to having that, because having Venus here in the 4th house, a lot of times people are very generous to you. Your family members can be very kind and generous or very giving to you. To have that in your house and you're in your placement there. So, there could be indication there. But what's also interesting? Wherever your Venus is, sometimes that's also what people envy. So some people could have envied the way that maybe Ted got treated by, say, his grandfather, right? Or his grandma or his mom. Like there could have been some jealousy from others that could have indicated that, or him being jealous of other people for having a better family. Venus sometimes can have that jealous, envious attachment to it. So a lot of the times too, he might have had fun doing a lot of things at home. I know that they stated somewhere where Ted would always try and hang out or be around his grandfather, and his grandfather would help him and teach him stuff, and he would just help his grandfather around the place, and Ted was really attached to him. So that could also be a thing too, where he had a lot of fun and would want to be very helpful there. Another thing as well is people with this placement, there could be manipulative people in the home. He can sometimes get feeling hurt or passive aggressive at times, because a lot of times Venus, is not very confrontational up front. Venus does things in passive ways. So to have that as well, and to have that placement, and to also have it in to have his Venus in Scorpio in retrograde, he might have experienced some hardships when it comes to possessiveness with people, when it comes to feeling not seen, not heard, maybe keeping a lot of secrets from his loved ones. And obviously, he did keep a lot of secrets from his loved ones. He really did blindside quite a few people. And it's very interesting to see that because, there was a part of Ted that he felt he needed to hide, that he felt ashamed of, that he felt was not normal, that I think that he tried to compensate that. And honestly, I think Ted wanted to be seen in a positive light. He didn't want to be seen as a monster. And it's interesting is because I think Ted, in a lot of ways, kind of almost preferred to himself as a monster, but it was almost as if he was detached from that aspect of him as well. So I kind of wonder if Ted had the ability to detach from one reality to another reality to a different reality. It's like he said that once the hunger of hurting a person, once all of that went away, it was like it was almost as if having amnesia. It was almost as if, what did I do? Why did I do this? And then he would just dispose of the bodies. And that was almost the way he kind of made it sound like as if going into psychosis, he wasn't himself. And then going out of psychosis, he now was himself. And it was almost like he detached from that violent side of him. And, having Scorpio in that house, maybe he might have felt overheard. Maybe he didn't feel like he was being acknowledged. And sometimes having that placement can also show it in passive aggressive or darker ways of doing things. So, having that there is a lot to it. And also, not only that, but Venus is things that we love, things we enjoy, topics we like to explore. Venus is all about feeling good and our values. And, maybe it's possible that for Ted, maybe he, loved the darker side of things. Maybe he was interested and fascinated with, just different things that a lot of people might perceive as taboo or might perceive as wrong. So there has been a lot of things that has happened in Ted's life that kind of, I think, could have led to Ted behaving in ways that he has. Now, because Venus is in retrograde, a lot of the people that have Venus in retrograde, they struggle. And I mean, they struggle when it comes to love. They struggle when it comes to connections. There is a weird mental or weird barrier or block there that they just can't seem to communicate with the opposite or same sex, right? There's just something there that makes them have to try. And, a lot of it comes from self-sabotage behaviors, a lot of self-sabotaging behaviors happen with this placement. And, the love of financial matters, and maybe a lot of the times they want to kind of hide that from the outside, that they're money hungry or that they want things, right? These can be the negative sides of having Venus in retrograde. Now, the positive side is a lot of the times when people have Venus in retrograde, when they learn from their mistakes and they learn from the way that they treat others and the way that they have harmed others, and they grow from it and learn from it, then and only then do they start finding rich, fulfilling relationships that really do bring out the best in them, that really do bring out what is truly who they are. Now, not everybody, obviously, who has Venus in retrograde are bad people or have any issue truly, but there could just be a sense of self-sabotaging behaviors that come there. They might have a hard time communicating love to people or translating that, right? They might even want to push away love when really they want the love. So there's just a lot of different things that can kind of go wrong with having Venus in this placement. Now, he might even be having self-worth issues here. A lot of the times there could be a lot of self-doubt that comes with this placement. And, he could have experienced relationships and breakups that were very painful to him on an emotional level. And not only that, but maybe he even attaches his worth and his value on relationships. So when someone breaks up with him, he could really take that to heart. Now, he did have a girlfriend before the the girl that he was with when he got caught. But he was in college and got a girlfriend, and I guess she was rich and she had a lot of things going for her. And I think Ted, in a lot of ways, felt almost like she was out of his league, or he maybe didn't feel like he really deserved her. But when they broke up, she broke up with him, and I guess he took it so hard that years later he worked really hard to get to where he was, and then when she wanted him back, he got back together with her and then broke up with her because that was his way of seeking revenge. So already you can see that there is a sense of pettiness there and wanting revenge, which again is affiliated with having that Scorpio placement there and then having it in retrograde. I think he, in a lot of ways, he could have behaved in immature ways at times. And again, taking a lot of things very much so to heart. He took what people would say and do in relationships very personally. And a lot of people do when they have Venus in retrograde. So, he might be and honestly, I believe this too. He's the type of person, I believe, that would be very private with his struggles and his money issues. He wouldn't really tell people when he was struggling. He wouldn't probably tell people if he was low on money because, I do believe that Ted, in a lot of ways, had an image to maintain. He wanted so badly to feel normal, and he wanted so badly just to have a family. But I think, again, there's other aspects to him that I don't think he could quite shake, that I don't think he could quite let go of, that I think really did impede and impact the way that he perceived himself and how he perceived others. So I think a lot of that did really kind of come down to the way that he felt about himself. And I also believe that Ted had a lot of high standards for himself. He probably set the bar very high and expected himself to reach certain goals, and when it didn't happen, I think he was very devastated and angry, especially towards himself and maybe even others. Maybe this is another thing too, is I do wonder if perhaps Ted could have suppressed a lot of anger and rage that maybe just finally eventually snapped and, caused him to go into these manic episodes. So another thing too is with this type of placement, a lot of the times to having Venus in retrograde, a lot of people would idealize the sense of marriage and love because they struggle so much with relationships. A lot of these people with that placement really do want love, really do want to feel loved. And to have Scorpio there too, it just adds on to any other type of traumas or any other type of things that could go wrong, that could also perpetuate or cause him to maybe feel the way that he could have felt. So that is something else to kind of keep in mind there. And a lot of times people who have Venus in Scorpio, let me just say, they have this magnetism about them. They just ooze out sexuality. It's just a natural thing. It's not that they are themselves hypersexual. It's just they are more likely to be sexualized. They are more likely to have people question them when they're dating, like, are you cheating on me? Or they might be the one to do that to their partner, right? It goes both ways. But a lot of the times people with Venus and Scorpio are very possessive of their partners, or their partners are very possessive of them. So you will see that, in placements with that, they can be obsessive with their partners. But one thing I will say here about Scorpios, a lot of the time, Scorpios are extremely loyal people. And I think that's why betrayal is such a hard lesson for Scorpios to learn, because there is a sense of breach of trust. There's a sense of this, hey, I was loyal, I kept your secrets, I did all these things for you. And then it's like when a Scorpio gets betrayed, there is this urgency and this need to want to backlash, right? Because Scorpios, they can't, like the actual
animal, when they feel threatened, it's almost like a natural instinct to want to sting them back or want to hurt them or want to protect themselves. So you have to be very careful sometimes with the Scorpio because, again, sometimes that scorpion tail can come back and get you. So a lot of the times, people with Venus in Scorpio, they can be very possessive, but they are very loyal and they are very emotionally attached oftentimes to people that they're with. Venus, comparatively with it, Venus is all about music and art and beauty and what aesthetic you love, right? That is Venus. And to have Venus here in Scorpio, a lot of times people dress a little edgy. They might listen to darker music, or they might listen to things that just seem a little out of the ordinary. But yeah, a lot of the people who have this as well also have been stated to have piercing eyes. People who have Venus in Scorpio, their eyes are like they're staring into your soul. And when you piss off a Venus in Scorpio, you will know by just the death glare and just the icy daggers that's being thrown into your direction. That's some things that that a lot of people have talked about when people who have Venus in Scorpio. But yeah, it's very interesting because obviously his influence and taste of music, art, clothing, and interests can have a tendency of having a little bit of that darker nature to it. So that is something that is to be noted that I thought was kind of cool. So in Ted's childhood, he thought his mother was his sister, and Ted's mom was actually tried to give him up for adoption, but Ted's grandfather told her to come home and that they will raise him. So basically, she had a kid out of wedlock. She didn't want the kid. Her dad convinced her to come home, and they pretended to be the parents, and she just was the sister. And that's kind of what ended up happening. Now, Ted eventually ended up with a stepdad. And this, as Ted got a little older, eventually his mom said, "No, I'm not your sister. I'm actually your mom. These are your grandparents. We're leaving." And, I think that really did shock Ted. I think that really did impact him because he really did believe that that was his sister for a very, very long time, but it was actually his mom. And so, I think Ted initially didn't really feel wanted or loved truly because I think, of course, thinking about it in the term of, my mom was going to give me up for adoption, but instead my grandparents took me in and raised me, and knowing that she let them do that and he thought that she was his sister, I'm sure there was some resentment there. I'm sure there was some anger towards his mother. I'm sure there was a lot of feeling unwanted, and I'm sure that impacted him. He didn't get along with his stepdad at all, and I think he definitely resented his mother for knowing this too. And also, the mother never told Ted who his dad was. So Ted had no clue who his real father was, and this bugged Ted. Ted really wanted to know. And then he found out his birth certificate had his father as unknown. So that made him even more angry because he thought she was just keeping it from him. Like, "Who is my dad? Who is my dad?" She would say, "I don't know." So Ted decided to take it upon himself, went to get his own birth certificate, still didn't know. So Ted's cousin would make fun of him for being illegitimate, and he had a lot of violent tendencies, right? He was really angry, I think, about his home life. I think he was mad that he kind of ended up living with his mom when he thought that his mom was his sister. And I think he just had a lot of different resentments and different things. And also not knowing who his real father was. And that was really important to Ted. And he still to this day, before he even actually got executed, he still did not know who his father was. And I think that really did bug Ted at his core, because I think Ted hated the idea. I think Ted had a belief that family was important. I think he had a good set of morals around family, and I think he hated the fact that his family um, wasn't perfect. And I think Ted really wanted to create a perfect family. And, yeah, it was just, I think there was a lot of things there for him that maybe could have led to him acting out and behaving in certain ways. Because as he was a child, Ted was known to be violent. He was known to have a lot of violent tendencies. He began to break the law, and when he was like very little, he would like to scare people and hit kids with sticks in the back of the head. And he was also suspected at the age of 14 to have killed an 8-year-old girl. And her name was Anne Marie Burr. He lived only a few miles away from her house, and she was taken in the middle of the night. And he was suspected to be spying into people's homes at night. So a lot of people were thinking maybe it was Ted, because there's been several times when the cops have been called on him because he was spying in people's homes, watching people get undressed, watching people just doing daily things. Like, he was obsessed with watching people in his neighborhood, and he would go around watching like families. And I really am wondering if Ted was just like spying on people because he had a curiosity about family. I think he was curious because I think he didn't have the way, I think he had an image and an imagination about how he wanted family to be. And I'm wondering if he would like wander around and watch people's houses, because I think he was fascinating about their family and why like everyone's family is different. I don't know. But all I know is that he started creeping on people and making people very uncomfortable in the neighborhood. And then this girl goes missing. And again, obviously, they couldn't really do anything. He was 14, and there was no true actual evidence that he did do anything to poor Anne, but we don't know. So that could have been Ted's first victim, but we actually, to this day, still have no clue. And he never owned up or confessed to that. So let's keep going. Mars in the fourth house. So he has his Mars in the fourth house, and again, a lot of strong placements in the fourth house. His family was very influential when it comes to Ted's life. And again, and even that, it's like, the fourth house also can indicate neighborhood. So, I think that Ted, he was known of being really a weird kid in the neighborhood. He did have some friends, but I think even his friends thought he was a little weird. So I think in a lot of ways, it could have shaped the way that he perceived things and acted out. Ted had a strong need to build a home and to keep everyone safe in it. He was always saying how he loved his family, and, even when, that's why I think it really was really shocking to people, because he had such a family ethic way of viewing life and wanting to have a family and protect them and wanting to have his own home and, wanting to be married and have kids and, all these different things. But there was this aggressive side to him, but they never saw it. Like, he was so protective of his family, but would just be this killer and this murderer and rapist in the night. It was insane. It was like, two different people. Family members could have kept secrets and used his secrets against him, or vice versa in the home. With Mars in this house, and to have Mars in the fourth house, that's a lot of indication of a lot of movement. There could be a lot of arguments. And, I'm sure Ted was able to stand his ground in arguments. A lot of times, especially having Mercury in the fourth house in Scorpio, he probably was really good at debating and in arguments. But in a lot of ways, there could have been some kind of an aggression in the home, or there could have been a lot of fighting. At times he probably had to debate and win by logic. I'm sure that there were times when Ted had to protect himself in some way or another in his own home, because to have Mars there, Mars, wherever Mars goes, that's a lot of energy to put into a house. Mars in of itself is a powerhouse, and it's also where a lot of people may want to attack you, or you may want to attack others, because a lot of times wherever Mars is, you have more confrontation in that house. You have more debates in that house. You have more going on. There's more chaotic energy. So, in a lot of ways, he could have experienced a lot of things inside that house. Now, I will say, he can have great health well into old age, because a lot of people who have Mars in the fourth house usually have pretty decent health all the way up as they get older. And that is something that a lot of people with that placement oftentimes get. So as he gets older, he was probably, and even when he did die, he had really good health. So that is one blessing I will say that this house and this placement gives you, to having Mars in the fourth like that, to be able to say that, usually they live a pretty decently long time in a pretty healthy way most of the time. Unless there's other things that interfere with his Mars or anything like that. Sometimes people can have different aspects or different placements that could change and alter it. But usually people, if they have a pretty good placement there, they have really good health, and they have really well, yeah. So his Mars is in Sagittarius. But a lot of the times when people have Mars in Sagittarius like this, it usually means that nothing is more important than his goals. His goals is important to him. Anything that has Sagittarius placement, especially with Mars, because Mars is very action oriented, right? It takes action. It doesn't wait. It doesn't think. It doesn't say, should I do this? Should I do that? It just goes for it. So Mars, having that there, sometimes, he's born with this uncontrollable amount of energy. And a lot of times people who have Mars in Sagittarius oftentimes could have a very high sex drive, or is very sexually driven. And that is one thing I will say is very interesting, because, having that type of placement and having that curiosity too, people who have Mars in Sagittarius oftentimes can be a very curious people in the bedroom, and everything like that. So there can be a lot of motive to having this placement. There is also this sense of needing to have self-control, needing to learn to take care of yourself. And what's interesting? A lot of times people who have this placement oftentimes can have many lovers, right? They have many people that they are with. A lot of the times they have variety. And, unfortunately, his variety happened to be more forceful, right? He would basically essentially like grape these girls, and yeah. But that's something to note, because people who have Mars in Sagittarius oftentimes have had many multiple sexual partners, or are more likely to experiment, or more likely to want to explore, or even be like expeditionists and things like that. Mars is one of the planets that I will say you want to look at when it comes to your sex drive and what drives your desires and your actions, why you do the things you do. Because Mars is very action oriented, and it's very driven around your energy. So he does enjoy competition with this placement, and a lot of the times he loves to travel, especially if it's a job or things like that. Like, he loves to just keep seeing new places, and he always wants to learn new things and is very adventurous. So he might just pick up hobbies, or might just do things just to learn, or just take time to just explore something. So that is one thing that I find interesting. And you know what else too? And I think this is something that a lot of people might not really talk about, but Sagittariuses are more likely to be people that are like rock climbers or go out in nature, right? They're more like your hikers or your mountain bike, like bike mountain biking or snowboarding. I think a lot of people, especially if you have Mars in Sagittarius, there might be a need to want to go out in nature. And several of his victims were buried in the forest and in the woods. He would go out and hike up there and bury them there. And he's done that with several amount of people, and I'm wondering if, maybe it could be due to that placement. Maybe he knew good places. Maybe he would go out and hike or go out and travel and see where maybe he could bury people or where he could put things. It wouldn't surprise me if he was strategic enough to really think about these things, because he was not a stupid man. He had a very high IQ. I mean, up in the 2%. I'm sure he was able to really think about things in a very strategic way. I'm sure he was very explorative and would look for places to maybe put people, or would look for places that were more hidden or secluse, or would explore things and learn new things. And it wouldn't surprise me, just wanted to throw that out there. It really would not surprise me if that was one of the things that he would do. Because again, he's really, everything that he has, it seems like everything that he has done really does kind of reflect aspects of his chart. And it's just crazy because of the fact that he's traveled around and, 7 different states that he has done these things to poor innocent people, like at least 7 different states. And the only reason he got caught was because all of them started to piece it together that they all had similar cases, and they were able to draw it back to him. And that was the only reason he ever got caught, plus that call in from his girlfriend because she was getting suspicious. So, in a lot of ways, though, he was being smart. He figured he wasn't going to get caught. I mean, he went to different places, different states. He went to different locations. The only thing that was consistent was the girls all looked similar. They all had brown brunette hair, they all had long hair, and they had the part down the middle. And that was his type. That was his ideal type. He loved girls like that. And I think that people were piecing that together like, oh, hey, no, this happened here too. This happened there. And they're able to link it all back to him. But in most of the time, though, that was crazy because it felt like he really was covering up his tracks, right? It really did, except for there were still patterns there. So that's just something that I wanted to say was I'm sure he was very strategic and thought he was getting away with a lot, and he really did. And again, we only got to about 30 that he admitted, but we're pretty sure it's more than that. So it's just such a shame. It really is. But yeah, I'm sure that for him, he was very smart, very strategic about what he would do. And, I think he was very skillful with his words. I think he was able to lower women's ambitions. I think he was able to come off like he was being nice, come off as being kind or genuine. I'm sure he was able to get these girls to trust him. And the fact that he's a lot more handsome than the average killer, a lot of people don't think about like, oh, this person's a killer. Like, who walks around thinking that, and he would wear crutches, you guys. He would put on crutches and pretend to be carrying heavy things and had girls help him. And that's how he would strike up conversations with them. He would sometimes pretend, I think one time he pretended to be a cop and almost got a girl that way. She just barely escaped him. It's insane. He planned it out. He didn't just act out super violently out of nowhere. He lured these people in before even doing any of that. Or sometimes he would just break in the middle of the night when they were sleeping. I mean, he planned them all out in different ways. And it's scary to think that, how strategic he really was. And, I think that having that Scorpion and that Sagittarius placements like that in Cancer, I think it really all kind of did lead to that point. It makes sense how smart and strategic he is, and why he did what he did. So we have here Jupiter in Scorpio. Now, he can be limited by things. And and he can be limited by things that he finds irresistible. So this could mean that it's almost like this pain-seeking pleasure thing. Sometimes maybe he feels like he can't have it and that's why he wants it, you know. But one of the things I will say though, a lot of the people with this placement with Jupiter in Scorpio do believe that they can create their own luck. They're kind of like their own lucky charm in a way. Privacy is really, really important to Ted. Anybody with this placement, they need that privacy. They're the type of people that would win the lottery and maybe never tell a soul. He can be very successful if he wants to, take time and be serious and dedicate his time and his passion towards whatever it is he wants to accomplish. He can do that. He can possess a very charming, empowering, like energy about him. A lot of the times he can even kind of influence people in manipulative ways, or can influence people in by the way that he could behave, right? Maybe he's like, for instance, people with this placement, it wouldn't surprise me if he studied psychology and then used that psychology against people, knowing what he was doing, but was actually just doing it, right? And reaping the benefits of that, being manipulative and knowing that he's being manipulative, but choosing to use it for bad if he chooses to, rather than good. And again, Ted did. He would plan out how he would approach these women. He wasn't just, oh, hey, she's good enough, or hey, she's cute. He would stalk them. He would look at them. He would observe them before even approaching them, because he would study them and figure out how to lower their guard against him. So also having this placement, there can be some darker sides to this placement. For instance, a lot of the times, death, birth, sex can be in the front of his mind a lot of the time with this placement. Because Jupiter is king of abundance and Scorpio is like the queen of fixation. It can cause him to get a little carried away at times. And sometimes he can kind of start fixating on sex, or fixating on death, or fixating on, all these crazy things, right? Like his mind could have gone so deep with having Jupiter in Scorpio like this. So the fact that Jupiter is now, and here's the thing that's interesting, we're now getting out of the 4th house after all of those stelliums. That's a lot of placements. And can I first just say that these are all of the main planets. Your moon, your sun, your Venus, your Mercury, your Mars. Those are the 5 first main planets. And you're telling me that it's all in his 4th house. You know what I mean? That's so insane to me to think about, because those are all the main development planets that we really look at the most. And that just so happens to be his planets, the stellium in those. Anyway, I just wanted to move on from that. But I just thought that was interesting, because now we're finally getting out of the stellium and we're getting more into that 3rd house now. So we're changing and breaking up a little bit of that routine and those habits, and fixating a little more on other things. So he could have had a good education as a child, but like I said, maybe even having some learning issues, maybe with speech, or just being slow to certain aspects, could have impacted and shaped a little bit. I think for Ted it was more the social aspect. I don't think it was necessarily the learning aspect. I think that the social aspect for Ted was damaging, but I think that altogether he was academically very intelligent. So he knows how to communicate his ideas, and a lot of times people with Jupiter in the third house, they're very expansive with communication and their ideas, and he can be social and usually can be lucky with groups of people. But at times, with certain placements that he had, like I said, he either is very loved or very hated. There's really no in between with Ted. And I think that's where he's experienced some of his difficulties in life, is the two extremes. So I'm wondering if with Ted, is he probably, and I do believe Ted did have friends. And he has stated that he has had friends. Of course, some of his friends said, I always thought something was a little weird with Ted. But for a lot of people, he could have had a lot of friends, or he could have just been very known. And of course, he was known in the neighborhood. Like I said, some of his neighbors reported that he was watching them or peeking into other people's windows. But not only that, but Ted was just known. Everybody knew Ted's family. So, in a lot of ways, he could have felt very overwhelmed by getting to know new people and new places. One of the aspects that I thought was very interesting is having Jupiter in the third house. The third house is when you go outside your family, right? It's when you go to school, it's your cousins, it's your brothers, it's your sisters. A lot of the times fall into the third house. And these people can really shape the way you view life. And, his cousin would bully him. Ted would go to school and he was a little bit ostracized, I think, at times. I think Ted also was misunderstood a lot. But he was very smart in school and he was very, dedicated to things, And I think that for Ted, I think sometimes he would get overwhelmed by other people and other environments as a child. It would not have surprised me, and that could have also shaped the way that he viewed the world. And I wonder if Ted might have perhaps had some kind of an outlook on the world, that maybe the world might not be as safe as it should be, which could have also led to him perhaps having those violent tendencies and feeling like he might need to take that out on others. Now, that's just an observation. That's not like something that, to form your own opinion, basically. And another thing as well with having this placement is that he can feel like he can get pulled from different directions, maybe wanting to please others at times, maybe feeling like they want him to do one thing when he wants to do another thing. There can be some kind of an overwhelm. And having this placement there as well really teaches you to have self-control over your own feelings. So this is something where maybe Ted might have had emotional outbursts, or could have had emotional meltdowns, or some kind of psychological breakdown from feeling overwhelmed by other people. But a lot of the times too, people with this placement are really good at giving advice. So that is one thing I will highlight as a positive as well. Now we're going to go into here Saturn in Leo. So having Saturn here in Leo, Saturn is one of my favorite planets, but I will say Saturn is a tough one. Anything that has Saturn in the house or in a placement, it oftentimes indicates burden and consistency and just basically farming, right? You're chipping away at everything. You're building your character. You're building your strengths. You're taking your weaknesses and you're improving upon them weaknesses. That is what Saturn brings into your life. It is not a fun planet to have to deal with, but the rewards are so good. It's just an amazing. Any reward you get from Saturn is due from hard work, and no one can take it away from you. And if they do, you can just build it back up again quicker because you did the work with Saturn the first time. So it's kind of one of those more permanent successes. It's more of a permanent thing that you develop over time. It's building that sense of character. So having it in Leo, well, a lot of the times, one of the things that he needs to work on is building his self-esteem, building up his self-worth. And he needs to learn to foster a sense of confidence in himself. But, a lot of the times people with Saturn in Leo have to learn because they might have this superiority complex where they feel like maybe the world doesn't see the greatness that they are, but yet it's kind of that you need to build that sense of greatness. Yes, you see it. Yes, there's a potential, but there's that need to build it. So sometimes people with Saturn in Leo need to humble themselves in order to build up that better, greater character that they need to truly develop in order to be a more rounded individual. So this can make people hate them if they act as if they're better than others, because people with that, again, there can be a sense of arrogancy with this placement. Saturn is showing you all of the pitfalls and all of the things you need to work on. Saturn is like a slap of reality in your face. Wherever Saturn is, it is the harsh truth. There is no sugarcoating it with Saturn. There is no, if you have some kind of flaw and it's in the house of Saturn, in the placement of Saturn, it will be highlighted to you. And you will understand. It's almost like you can't turn a blind eye from Saturn, because Saturn's in your face. It's like the father of the zodiac. This is what you did wrong. This is how you need to improve. And that is Saturn. So, he might know, people have probably told Ted that he could have been arrogant or could have been self-centered. Ted could have heard people tell him things about himself that maybe he did not want to hear, that may not have been comfortable for him. And that's one of the things that can occur having Saturn here in Leo. Saturn is a karmic planet. It is also known as the malefic planet. There are a couple of malefic planets, and Saturn is one of them. So that pretty much means that just teaches you harder lessons, like Pluto, Saturn. Those are called like the harsher placements, the harder planets to learn, but it also comes with such good and great rewards, versus Jupiter is fast and quick, and Saturn is long lasting. So he could have experienced a lot of painful events growing up, because it's teaching him a form of reaching enlightenment. When you have Saturn in the 12th house, anything that's in the 12th house is transparent. It is considered spiritual at that point. It is no longer in the physical. It is more of it's almost like a dimensional place. It's something that it's not tangible. It's not something that you can just touch, but it's something you can feel. And it's something that reflects back to the soul, right? It's your own faith. It's your own understanding of one's own spirituality, of who you are as a person. So it's basically peeling back layers of I'm more than just this body. And that's a lot of what the 12th house signifies. Now, having this placement, he could have had vivid dreams when he was sleeping. Maybe he had a lot of dreams that he remembers. Now, I would not know that for sure, but a lot of people with this placement happen to have dreams like that. He could also have a hard time sleeping due to stress of the unknown. So if he has a lot of stuff going on in his life and he's stressed out, he might have a really hard time sleeping, because sleep also gets, whether it's impacted or not, in the 12th house. So, because that is now Pisces domain, and dreaming is a part of Pisces. So sleeping is very significant in this placement. So he could be stressed a lot, and that could impact the way he sleeps. Saturn is teaching him lessons to help him grow spiritually, and he needs to learn not to create more karma for himself, meaning that he needs to learn to avoid harming others, or learn to avoid doing things that won't benefit him in the long run, as well as other people. There is this sense of needing to figure out logic and reality, and actions have consequences. So a lot of the times that is a harsh reality that people with this placement get, because it's like saying, hey, you did this, and now because you did this, now this happened to you. So because he, unalived a bunch of people, basically, he now has to face the consequences of death row and had to face the consequences of being in prison. So that was a sense of harsh reality coming down in his world. And even Ted Bundy stated to himself when they did an interview, they did the last interview with him before he died. And they asked him, "Are you scared to die?" And he said, "Yeah, I am." And he said, do you believe you deserve to die?" And he said, "Well, I do believe I deserve to pay for my crimes." But basically, he was stating that he was afraid to die. And he was scared to die. And he even saw the irony in that, knowing that he ended others' lives, but at his own hands, but was afraid to go on himself. So that is another learning thing, right? Of consequences. And that was his karma, was a lot of different things that have occurred to him, like getting caught and being on death row and having to have his own life taken from him. So these are things that can definitely play out with that in that placement, and every time he would sway away from doing something that will be beneficial in this placement, it could cause natural and harder consequences for him down the line, because Saturn really doesn't play around. And the more you go against Saturn, the harder Saturn pushes back. And sometimes it pushes back so hard that you can't come back from that reality. And that's not to scare people or anything. That's just usually how, Saturn teaches. And the fact that it was on a spiritual level, I'm sure there was a lot of confusion about what he wanted to do in his life and where he was going, because, your spirituality really does, in a lot of ways, illuminate truly your own true desires and who you are. It's a part of us. Our soul is a key factor in our authenticity. And having Saturn there really is teaching you some truths about oneself and one's character, even. So his Saturn is in retrograde, and that could also indicate a lot of things. Now, Saturn, and anybody that has Capricorn in their charts, a lot of the times those people can get very guilt tripped. They always carry burdens and guilt, and I've known quite a few people who are Capricornian, like Capricorn, or just have heavy Capricorn placements in their chart, and they feel obligated to do a lot for people. They feel obligated to cause a lot of, they feel responsible for people. They feel responsible for a lot of things. And to have it in retrograde like that, it's almost like there is now it's almost like a double down on the burdens. So a lot of guilt and self-doubt really can occur in this placement, and he can put on a brave front, but he sees himself as vulnerable or afraid of letting other people down. A lot of people with this placement might feel like failures. They might feel like they're scared to see other people look at them in a negative way. So he might have felt like a weight of the world on his shoulders. He probably wanted his family to see him as this great upstanding guy, but really he felt like he could not live up to that standard. So there could be a sense of self-sabotaging there as well. And also this feeling like you need to have like a clean and orderly environment can also be huge for this placement. But there's also this sense of not feeling comfortable. You just don't ever really feel comfortable being around others truly. You don't really feel comfortable being in your own body. It's something about having that Saturn there in the 12th house that really can irritate at the soul, that can really tug on you and really make you, it's almost like having a consciousness inside you that you're constantly trying to smother out because it's too much work or it's too hard, or it's, again, you want to deny the reality of what you're doing, so that is something also to kind of indicate and to kind of think about as well. Now we're moving into Uranus and Gemini. And a lot of people with Uranus and Gemini are very versatile. They're very intuitive. A lot of times people with this placement, he really liked science, especially when it's related to topics that he's interested in. He can attract unusual friends. And, also, he can be great with language. When people have Uranus and Gemini like this, they can be very spontaneous, very funny, very witty, very good at timing sometimes. You know, you've ever been in a group with people and there's always that funny person, but they always chime in right at the perfect moment and it just makes it so funny. You know, people with Uranus and Gemini oftentimes can be one of those people that are really good with things like that. So he could have had complications with his studies. And, you know, this is something where I was going to say that he could not complete his degree to be a lawyer. And he could have been a good writer or a good communicator if he really chose to do that as well. Um, but he can easily become restless at times and he always needs to like move around because a lot of times people with this placement they have that tendency of always needing to stimulate the mind or always needing to stimulate and move and do things and change up environments. They don't like to stay in the same place for too long. You know, they need to do something to change what he's doing. So another thing as well too is people with this placement usually enjoy puzzles and casual conversations. You know, when he relaxes, he can also become interested in different fields of work and studies, or just likes to lose focus on things at times, right? So these are things that he can have a tendency of creating. And Uranus is also very unpredictable. And to have it in Gemini in the third house also can indicate that, you know, his schooling can have been unpredictable. You know, he might not have known how his teachers were going to act or behave, or how his peers were going to act or behave. And a lot of these things kind of could have kept him on his toes. Again, there's a sense of needing to constantly change and move things around for himself. And the fact that Uranus is here, Uranus is in his 10th house. Now, the 10th house is in Capricorn, Saturn's domain, and he could have had a really hard time staying in one job at a time. You know, he might have jumped from job to job, or could have just been jobless for a while. And I do believe he was at a couple of points in his life. He also wanted to change things up a lot because Uranus is constantly like, let's shake things up. And the 10th house is all about career. So even though he probably knew he wanted to be a lawyer or be something in the field, there could have been uncertainties as well to his career because a lot of the times too, having Uranus in there it's just very unpredictable. So he could have had a really hard time climbing the corporate ladder or having a really hard time even keeping a job. He takes on this hard work attitude in all areas of his life because he believes that he needs to, but would like to take breaks from working more often than others. So he likes to work hard, but not too hard, right? So he enjoys his breaks and he tries to take frequent breaks, right? So if you ever meet people, right, and they smoke, let's say if they smoke cigarettes, and you know how like you can actually leave to take a smoke break at work and stuff, he would be that person that would probably abuse it. You know what I mean? To having Uranus in the 10th house, he'd probably be like, oh, smoke break, even though I just had one 15 or 20 or 30 minutes ago, I'm going to have another smoke break. Like that would be somebody that could have Uranus in the 10th house, you know? So people who have Uranus in the 10th house could also have very creative ideas. You know, they can kind of shake up the work environment. They can come up with ways to help grow company or help grow money. He needs to work on his independence, though, with this, especially when it comes to work. You know, he might know how to get things done, but he might have a tendency of just doing what he wants to do and just act on those decisions versus going and making sure it's okay, right? He might just say, oh, this is a good idea, and just do it. You know, people with Uranus in the 10th house like this, they can be very unpredictable at work. They can do a lot of weird things that maybe goes against the grain or the workflow of work. And so sometimes people with Uranus in the 10th house really have a hard time fitting anywhere in careers that are not conventional, like that are very conventional, right? So Uranus is in retrograde in his chart. So now we're going back into the retrograde, and he has this fear of change, right? And that's ironic coming from the fact that it comes with Uranus, because Uranus is all about change. And to have a retrograde there shows that he is mistrusting in people and technology, that he has a fear of things constantly evolving. Um, he might follow. He might be this person that will follow the law until out of nowhere he decides to just break out of it, right? So at day, he might be like a law abiding citizen, and then at night, he's out raping and murdering people, and that makes sense to have it in that way. It's like he can become kind of that rebel in the law in society. He can kind of have taboo ways of doing things that can be disruptive or can cause a lot of issues in society. And people with Uranus like that, they might have that impulse to do so. So now we're moving into Neptune, and his Neptune is in Libra. So he actually enjoys talking to people. He actually enjoys socializing, and not only that, but anything that has Libra in it is very diplomatic, right? And he might come off very understanding, very knowing, very, good at persuading people. He might have a very interesting way of talking to people, right? Stirring the mood around people. He can be moody, and sometimes he can get fixated on things with Neptune in Libra. Neptune's very dreamy. Neptune's the 12th house, right? It signifies Pisces. So having Pisces in with Libra like that can come off very dreamy, very different. He might have idolized certain things in his life, might have looked back on things in nostalgia and beauty and understanding. It seems like he's like that with his family as well. So, a lot of the times too, he might have a lot of good conversations with people, and people might remember him just due to having a good conversation with him. Because having this type of a placement, he can kind of come off very soft to the touch in that sense, right? Where maybe, like, again, there is this sense of worthiness and seeing like it's almost like having good cushion, right? When people get to know him, they're like, oh, this is a really cool guy. And it's in the second house, so people might think he's rich, or might have thought he had more money, or might have thought that he just looked like he might have had more authority, even because a Neptune can create illusions. And Libra is this beautiful, and Libra also already falls in the second. Well, technically Taurus falls in the second house, but they co-own Venus. And to have Libra in this sign in Neptune, there is a lot of like his image needs to be perfect. He likes to keep his image squeaky clean. He likes people to look at him in a high light. He likes to put on an act. He could be very deceiving to people. And as a lot of people know, they were really blindsided by him. But he also likes his efforts to go unnoticed. He gets mad if people don't notice the work that he puts into things, the value that he brings. If you don't know the value that he brings, he gets very angry, might even have angry outbursts at times for this. And a lot of the times, too, he might have found it hard to find a partner that matches his high standards. Maybe he feels like he has this idealistic, I think he has this really idealistic way of viewing family. And I think that for him, he might have never found somebody that could truly match his exact ideal relationship in his mind. And that could also be due to this placement, because a lot of times people that have Libra here in Neptune can really overly idolize certain things and aspects that might not even be real or reality even. He might even take time to rethink over things and before making a choice sometimes. Sometimes before he does something, he'll say, oh, well, this is smart. But, he'll rethink it and then go with whatever decision. So, again, there is a sense of sometimes seeing things, catching mistakes, and trying to correct them beforehand, but only due to caring about your image, you know. This placement might have a lot to do with image and values and standards and wanting to feel more seen in that way. And that's not all that this placement carries, but I will say that that is something that I feel like is kind of highlighted in his life because he really did want to put on a fake image and a fake facade, a little bit about who he was. And I think, like I said, I think it's just because he was ashamed of the way that he believed I think I truly do believe that he felt like he was not normal. And I think that Ted wanted to prove that he was normal. So this could have been a very highlighted insecurity for him as I think he wanted people to think he had money. I think he wanted people to think of him as successful. You know, he really did care about his image and what he maintained. And I think that he had a lot of standards for himself that I don't think even he could obtain. And I think he had standards for others that might have been too unrealistic to obtain. So, having Neptune in the second house here, this placement can be great for work in a creative field, right? A lot of times, people who have Neptune in the second house, they're artists, they're creative, they're very smart, or they have some form of a talent that they can make money off of, that they can grow in, and a lot of the times too. Um, he needed to learn or needs to learn how to manage money because people with this placement sometimes can overly spend their money and he can easily go into debt with this type of a placement. And it's just because sometimes it's easy to interpret you maybe having more money than you do or feeling like maybe you misjudged it, like, oh, I'll have this much money next month and then you don't get it. You know, little bad judgment calls on money can easily destroy anybody with this placement. And he also can sometimes easily trust others and then sometimes get scammed, right? So now I'm sure, and not to mention here too though, because of Ted being so smart and I think him seeing human nature, it wouldn't surprise me if he could also scam others and get money from them. So that is also a possibility with this placement as well. Sometimes people are more likely to be scammed or people are more likely to get scammed by them. It depends on where they fall on the placement, but that is something that can happen with this placement here. And another thing too is he has a hard time trusting his own ideas and can be sometimes very unrealistic at times when it comes to his ideas. So sometimes he has to, he'll have a great idea like how to make money, but might not have the reality or the logic or the structure or the true realism of what the time frame or what something might actually take to get to where he needs to go. So that is something too that he might have struggled with in his life. And he can be like very he might have been this person that might also at times daydream about what it would be like to have a lot of money. He might get in his head a lot about like, oh, if I was rich or if I had this or if I had that. He can also sometimes fear losing things and things being taken away from him, right? He might have that tendency of I guess you could say some people perceiving him as being selfish because maybe he has that innate fear of saying, no, but this is mine. Maybe there's a little bit of that greediness or a little bit of that holding on to what you have out of fear of someone stealing it or losing it in some capacity. So these are things that can reenact and things that could happen by having Neptune in the second house.
Now we're going to be looking into Pluto in Leo. So a lot of the times when we look at anything with Pluto, oftentimes we will be looking at power dynamics and what makes a person do the things that they do. Pluto is usually self-serving and motivated in different ways. So in a lot of ways, when you have Pluto in Leo, he could come off very prideful. He could also come off very courageous and having self-confidence, but there also is this underlying thing where sometimes people might think he's arrogant or they might take his motives and question his motives because of having this type of placement there. It can bring things kind of to light. And as well as, a lot of the times when people have Leo in this placement, they're very creative, especially when it comes to achieving certain goals. He seems to be a person who loved the spotlight and loved to kind of be in the center of attention. He thrives in social situations where he feels like he has more control in those situations. And also, again, Leo is all about that creativity, but that it's also, Leo knows how to put on an act and be charming. And I feel like in a lot of ways, Ted was a lot like that, as well as I think that sometimes he might find things challenging when it confronts his ego, or when something conflicts with his own self-centered beliefs. So there could be a little bit of a backlash there with this type of a placement. He also can be stubborn a lot of the times due to this placement, but also there is that need and sense of adventure. Scorpio is a very curious sign. And so, again, a lot of curiosity when it comes to these aspects that he has. And sometimes with this type of placement, there's this feeling in need of wanting to get out of your comfort zone, because Scorpio can sometimes push the boundaries and the barriers too. And also, because Leos are so big and larger than life, having that combination, there's a lot of ways where he could have stuck out, or a lot of ways where, he was searching for, it's almost like just kind of searching for different environments and different places. And not only that, but in a lot of the ways when people have this placement, Leos really like to take charge. So he could also have a tendency of at times maybe wanting to take charge in situations, wanting to control situations. And also, there's this sense and need of wanting money and luxury in life, wanting to be perceived that way, wanting to feel that way. And sometimes people who have this placement might be able to kind of fall into that trap of materialism at times. And his Pluto is in the 12th house. So in a lot of ways, this is a lot of, it's essentially, when you have Pluto, anywhere Pluto is in the natal chart, there is a shakeup. There is a sense of urgency of needing to change. Pluto really does kind of force you to deal with a lot of your issues. And to have it in the 12th house, which the 12th house is all about dreaming, it's about imagination, it's about seeing things above our human consciousness, right? It's understanding that there's something bigger than us out there. And for him, having Pluto anywhere in your chart, Pluto teaches you maturity. It's similar to Saturn, but Pluto will teach you the hard lessons when it comes to emotional strife, when it comes to learning kind of how others treat you is kind of how you treat others. There's a sense of, when Pluto comes anywhere in contact, there is this power dynamic, there's a struggle, there's this need to overcome diversity. There is a lot more to it. And so to have that in the 12th house, that would be kind of a little bit of a tough placement, especially because there is this needing of maturing spiritually. And having that other placement in his 12th house, having Saturn there as well, both planets in that house, I'm sure really is kind of a challenge for him, especially because in this lifetime, learning about karma and learning about restraining yourself, it seemed like he really struggled with having a sense of control in himself, almost as if he gave his power away to something higher than himself, almost like, he expected that something or someone would save him from it instead of him taking accountability entirely. I don't know. That's kind of the feeling that sometimes I would get when listening to Ted Bundy talk. Sometimes he just kind of came off as if he was almost detached at times with how he would describe things, as if he was describing a different person. There was like almost a sense of detachment from the things he's did. And I'm wondering as well as if it could be because of having Pluto and Saturn in those placements and him needing to learn to evolve. And having Sagittarius as well. Sagittarius is always focusing on higher knowledge, but it focuses on spiritual aspects as well. So I kind of wondered if Ted really struggled with having faith or really struggled with having some sense of comfort in his life. Also, the 12th house, nobody really talks about this, but the 12th house is associated with Pisces, and Pisces is the two fish, right? Usually when you depict Pisces, there's the dual fish, and I will say that it's interesting because I feel like Pisces are very sensitive. They're the oldest zodiac sign, but they're also the most elusive. They're the most hardest to really pinpoint. And a lot of the times your vulnerabilities come from things like that. If you hit a crab, the crab will fight back. If you hit a Scorpio, the Scorpio will fight back. If you hit a fish, the fish will swim away, right? It doesn't necessarily have too much of a defense mechanism unless it has teeth, right? Or some kind of, it depends on the fish, I guess, but pretty much what I'm trying to get at here is that Pisces, there is a sense of vulnerability there. And I feel, especially for the fact that Scorpio is very power hungry and wanting to protect oneself, it would make sense that he might act out in ways that were out of like a sense of, I need to protect myself. So I could see the violent tendencies having a placement like this, especially if it falters on his self-worth and self-confidence. Anything that he feels like strips away his power, he's more willing to probably fight to feel like he needs to fight to keep that part of himself. And it would not surprise me if that was one of his things is having that fear of being seen as vulnerable and having weak points, right? I think that he kept a lot of things to himself. I do believe that things might have been held against Ted in his life, right? Like blackmail was very possible in his life. Having situations where loved ones or people closest to him could have betrayed him or could have kept secrets from him. And of course, we already went through this and we already know that, he thought his sister, his mom was actually his sister, and he thought that was his sister. So obviously there was lies and deceit in his life, and it would not surprise me having a placement like this where maybe he was very weary of people in a lot of ways and really probably did push a lot of people away. And, sometimes, and a lot of this too is, sometimes he probably suppressed his emotions, because I know the 12th house really can force a person to kind of suppress. And I'm wondering if he could have just suppressed a lot of his emotions, and over time it just kind of got out of control, because anywhere you have Pluto, eventually you're going to start seeing darker aspects coming out of that area in your life, and you're going to start seeing habits that you might not really like, uglier traits in yourself. So it really wouldn't surprise me if Ted was like that. And also, gaslighting can be really affiliated in this house too. He could have dealt with people gaslighting him or him gaslighting others. I think that in a lot of ways, manipulation was taught at a pretty young age for Ted, and I think he was able to use that to his advantage. So his Pluto is in retrograde. And again, this is his last retrograde in his chart. I believe he had 4 retrogrades. Yes, he did. And a lot of the times when you have Pluto in retrograde, there can be this fear of not being in control, and it's almost as if it's more of a power struggle with this placement, because it feels like everybody and everything is coming against you, and it's like you're having to learn to control yourself. A lot of the times manipulation really does happen, or being betrayed by others a lot too. There's a lot of fears that come up with Pluto, and the fact that it's in retrograde, that just means that there's extra lessons, or that there's a little bit more of a longer delay in receiving benefits or in receiving success. Sometimes that's why you see some people who becomes more successful later on in life, looking at their charts, oftentimes you'll see they have either a lot of retrogrades, or you'll see that they have certain aspects that kind of held them back for some years so that they could start developing a little bit more, so that by the time they reach a certain point, they would be fully developed. So it does happen. And, with him, I feel like he probably, and to be fair with you too, I think that Ted was very private about his desires. And I think that one of his main desires would probably be a need for this control in his life. And I think that Ted maybe perhaps felt out of control. So I think that in a weird way, what he did to his victims was his way of taking control, of him feeling like he was in power. And I think that at night, that was where he kind of felt like he could finally be who he is. And then in the day, it's like he's trapped in the world that he created for himself, that he felt made him normal. So I think Ted struggled with a little bit of wanting certain aspects of his life, but feeling like the need to suppress it. And it wouldn't surprise me if he suppressed it so much that even he's not consciously aware of it. That does happen. So it kind of does explain a little bit of even the way he talks. When he slows down, if you ever hear him in interviews, he'll sit there and be quiet for a minute or two. He's never talking quick. He's always talking kind of slow, and it's almost like he's almost calculating the next thing he's gonna say, because again, there's something here about that need of control and influencing people. So we're going to now start entering into his north node. These two nodes, and essentially they're just 2 points in the sky next to the moon that kind of helps us see the gravitational pull of the moon, understanding, the moon's altitude. And pretty much we believe that there is a south node and a north node. And your south node is your past life. It's what your soul is good at. It's what your soul has developed over, because basically, if you cannot be created nor destroyed, but only the matter in the body in which you're in, your south node is kind of essentially your incarnated self. And then when you carnate into this life, your north node is what your soul wanted to achieve and work on in this life. So I hope I made that make sense, but let's get more into it here. So his north node is in the 10th house. So wherever your north node is, that's going to be a huge portion of what you want to achieve, what will make you feel better, what's going to help you feel the most fulfilled in your life before dying, right? So the fact that it's in the 10th house, I already saw throughout his chart that Ted struggled with keeping a job, or struggled with finding climbing up the corporate ladder, or able to make himself be stable in his career. And it makes a lot of sense here when you see in the 10th house, because this brings a lot of conflict, especially to his private life and his public life. So he will try to keep things private, but that might leak into his career. It might leak into other areas of his life. Him going out and doing these things in the middle of the night and then having to get up and go to work the next day probably isn't ideal. Things like that. Just little things that he may do.
that could cause him to ruin his career or even just his public persona. And obviously, him being caught and tried for murdering people is not a very positive light in the public eye. So it makes sense to see that this placement is here. He also needs to grow up and develop discipline with this type of a placement. He needs to learn consistency, and he needs to learn to be able to be more outspoken about things that matter to him, and he needs to work on getting rid of emotional addictions. Sometimes with people with this placement can get very attached to an idea or to a business or to a certain aspect, and that could make or break their career or even the public eye, right? So a lot of the times people with this placement really do kind of struggle with finding that home career balance. And not only that, but also feeling like they actually belong in their career, that they can actually take charge in their career. There's a little bit of a struggle between, can I have that power and can I have that responsibility? Can I set myself up for success instead of failure? And that's really where his situation lied. So his North Node is in Gemini, and wherever your North Node is, Gemini's counterpart is Sagittarius. So that would mean that Sagittarius would be in his South Node. So basically, it's wherever zodiac sign is across from you in the wheel. And his North Node is in Gemini, and that usually means that there needs to be some awareness, right? Especially when it comes to self-righteousness. People with Gemini in this placement, because you have to think they developed so many Sagittarius-like traits in a past life that, he can become very knowledgeable. He might think that he knows everything. There's a sense of, I'm right, you're wrong. Because Sagittariuses can sometimes fall into that self-righteousness. And not only that, but he needs to learn and accept and appreciate what other people bring to the table too. Because sometimes they can get lost in what they think and what they feel and how they perceive a situation and what they think will be the best for this company or the best for that. But instead, he needs to be more humbled and more willing to hear out other people's opinions because they might have something that's just as equal to bring. And I feel like that is one thing that a lot of people with the North Node in Gemini are always trying to learn. So let's get into the South Node a little bit here in Sagittarius. So a lot of the traits that most people who have the South Node in Sagittarius develop is a healthy curiosity, asking questions or thinking all the time, thinking about other ways to improve. A lot of people with South Node in Sagittarius are very tactical. They're very logical. They understand being able to see both sides of a situation. They can have a positive approach to life and other people. Their communication and their diplomatic skills can be a lot better than the average person. They can be more developed. And not only that, but a lot of the time Sagittarius doesn't always come off very threatening. They can, but a lot of the times people with the South Node in Sagittarius can kind of use non-threatening approaches to express an idea that makes other people want to listen. And not only that, but because Sagittariuses usually are very curious, they have oftentimes developed a better listening ear and are more open to new ideas and experiences. They also seek out personal information, and they always think about things before they just make a decision. So a lot of the times they are can be a little nosy, or just sometimes they are more focused on wanting to make the right choice. So they try and take calculated risks. And this is things that a lot of people with the South Node in Sagittarius have developed. And one of the tendencies that he needs to learn to leave behind due to having, because there's positives and there's negatives to everything. The tendencies that he needs to learn to leave behind in this lifetime
is being like aloof to things, acting as if he's not aware, or even sometimes turning a blind eye to things that maybe make him uncomfortable. Maybe feeling like, again, that self-righteousness, not caring and feeling like you're always in the right. Um, Sometimes Sagittariuses can have this carelessness, spontaneity, right? They just go and they do things they want to do and they don't think about the consequences. That is a tendency that he needed to learn to leave behind. Also, not taking shortcuts. Sagittariuses look at the bigger picture of things, and sometimes they might cut and take shortcuts instead of focusing on the little details of stuff. So that is another thing he had to learn in this lifetime. And also another thing too is kind of assuming that he knows that people know where they're at, right? So if he sees somebody struggling, he just automatically assumes that this person knows that they suck or that they're this or that they're that. It's like he makes assumptions about people that may or may not be an accurate depiction of a person. So that is another tendency that does happen. Another thing that it's the needing to be right all the time. A lot of people with this placement, that's one thing they have to learn to let go of. Thinking that they might know what other people are going to say or think before they do. So almost like sometimes he might just mind read and think that he just knows this person when he really doesn't. People with this placement oftentimes might do that as well. Sometimes he might just think that, oh, this is the truth, and then not take other people's views into account, right? Sometimes writing people off. Taking yourself too seriously too is actually another trait that I find occurs a lot with the South Node in Sagittarius, because a lot of times people take things way too seriously when it comes to themselves and the way that they approach life. And also, sometimes they act on intuition without checking the facts first. Sometimes if he gets a gut instinct, he's just going to do it without really thinking about it, because again, there's this is one thing he needs to leave behind, is that emotional attachment that he might have to people, places, and things, and that emotional attachment can drive him to act out in ways before truly knowing the full story. Another thing too is sometimes having this placement, the South Node, right? You get so comfortable over time that sometimes people kind of forget that there are other people's belief systems, and sometimes it can kind of make you question your own beliefs by somebody else challenging those beliefs. And also just being prejudiced against people and people's past circumstances. A lot of times people with Sagittarius in the South Node can sometimes be a little judgy about someone's past and be a little judgy about what has happened, and may not let certain things go. So that's one thing that people with Sagittarius in the South Node need to learn to let go of. And usually when people have this, especially when we go into the Gemini in the North Node, what is it that Ted really wants? And usually people with this type of a placement, what they want is to have total freedom to pursue the truth, right? He wants to know what's truth out there. He wants to find the truth for what fits him in his life. And he wants to be right, like all the time, right? These are things that he truly wants. He wants to feel like he's correct, that he's right, that people understand him. And, he wants people to appreciate his help. These are things that he feels would bring him satisfaction in his life. Usually, when you have people with these placements, that is most of the time what people fall into those categories truly want. And also, one of the things that I feel like Ted really probably needed to learn was not just focusing on his own truth, right? Listening and learning more from others would be very beneficial with this placement, because oftentimes Sagittarius is, and even Gemini, they're very smart. And it makes sense that a lot of the times they can fall into that, well, I already kind of know, right? Once you say, oh, I know, you kind of stop learning, and that could be a pitfall having that placement there. So a lot of the times you develop gifts and traits, right? Having your South Node in Sagittarius. So a lot of the traits and even the professions that Ted could have developed in past lives, or at least things that he might have a more natural gift in this lifetime, just these things could come a little easier to him having a placement like this, is he's really good at solving other people's problems and really good at showing people the bigger picture of things and help kind of make people see things from a different perspective. Another thing, too, is that he might be more knowledgeable on philosophies or religion or having awareness of ethics and morality, which is also kind of ironic because even Ted admitted, he knew what he was doing was wrong, but he just couldn't help himself. So again, there was this sense of his morals and his ethics probably being judged, like him judging his own self for his morals and ethics and his own actions. And in past lives, there was this need to always be seeking out truth and wanting to travel and see the world. There's also a tendency of maybe becoming a hermit or wanting to live in the wilderness alone. Sometimes a lot of these people can be kind of isolated in past lives, but they always try to seek out religious organizations or some kind of spirituality or some kind of higher knowledge, right? Wanting to reach some form of enlightenment. And that's something that a lot of people in that lifetime have learned to dedicate their time and their energy to. And sometimes society and relationships were neglected in his past life, having Sagittarius in the South Node. One of the things that he could have done or things that he could have enjoyed or could have done for a living was be a philosopher. Really good at having solving communication problems, patience and frustrations, learning to kind of learn how to balance that, bearing of truth, freedom, right? Wanting to keep, kind of wanting to feel this sense of I can't be stuck. I need to be able to still move. If I want to pick up and move, I need to be able to pick up and move. That was something that was important to him in a past life. Always feeling like he could have an escape plan, essentially. Living in society, and it's kind of like when people have this placement, sometimes they might have been afraid to ask people what their opinions are, or, maybe even go further with people. A lot of times people in this placement can kind of isolate themselves. So, and even in Ted's case, as he was a child, he was always kind of socially weird and awkward. And, it could make sense that from a past life, not truly developing the social skills that he needed in order to really fit into society. So a lot of the things, too, is duality. Duality happens a lot, and for those of you who do not know what duality is, it's kind of that black and white thinking. Instead of, it has to be all or nothing. It has to be one extreme or the other. But needing to break that habit and realizing that there's gradients in between, that there's grays, there's different shades. Not everyone and not everything is a cookie cutter mold, right, to what is going to happen. One of the things I will say, though, is that he has developed a great sense of optimism, or at least a good outlook when it comes to bad situations or having a hard time with things. He might be more able to pick himself back up versus others might sit there and struggle a little more than maybe he has. So that's one other thing I will say that he could have developed that's a more positive trait, is more of that resiliency and the optimism to do so. And integrity was a huge thing. Having trust issues with others could have been developed in a past life that could have led to Ted having other further trust issues in this lifetime. So those are things that I find very interesting and fascinating. A lot of the times when people have Sagittarius in the South Node, there are certain needs that could or was not developed and needs to be something that he needs to address in this lifetime. So acceptance and sharing is a need that he could have felt like needed to be fulfilled. These are things that, and it's like we all have wants, but needs are stuff that you have to have in order to grow spiritually, in order to thrive in all kinds of environments. These are things that we need for our own development. So for him, it's acceptance and sharing and staying in the present moment with people and things and not thinking about the past or the future, not staying stuck in his head. Those are the things that he needed to focus on and a sense of purpose, and honestly, in a lot of ways, I wonder if Ted just felt lost in his life, like he had no true direction and no sense of purpose. I think he knew he wanted to be a lawyer, but felt like maybe he couldn't pursue that as an option due to money and financial issues and other things that prevented him from continuing his schooling. But I feel like for Ted, I don't think he really knew what his purpose was. And I think he had so much anger and so much frustration inside that I wonder if maybe he just kind of detached from certain parts of himself. Because again, like I said, even when he got interviewed, it was almost as if he was talking in third person, as if he was just explaining it from a third party perspective. Change is something that needs to occur in his life, although there's this maybe feeling trapped in a past life, maybe feeling like in a past life he couldn't move, he couldn't travel, he couldn't do certain things. So in this life, there is that need to doing so. And that's interesting because he would travel around and move around, because I think that was a fear of his, is to stay stuck in one space, even though there's a part of him that still yearns for that. So spontaneity was something that does come up, as well as kind of restlessness that have been developed. One of the things that he needs to learn to do, though, is the need to slow down, right? Because he's always moving. He's feeling restless all the time. He feels like he needs to experience new things and explore new options, that sometimes he doesn't slow down and appreciate what he has, or needs to slow down and make better decisions. So these things could always backfire. So he has to learn to slow down in order to even, let alone appreciate what he has, but to also be able to truly regain back his footing before making a next adventure. And another thing too is needing to respect the words of others, needing to respect what he has to say too. That is something that he needed to learn to develop. He could have been a person where he could have crossed boundaries with people when people say no, or debate people into submission. There's ways that, and even in his chart, it says it a couple of times that he's really good at debating and getting into arguments. And, it would not surprise me if Ted would really use his words against people. Relationships in past lives and things that he seeks now would be the need for freedom in a relationship. The fear of connecting is one other thing that could have been a huge factor in his life, and also commitment, because that fear of commitment and lack of freedom, he could have affiliated freedom with no commitments, or having that commitment and being tied down and not having that freedom. So there could have been a little bit of a tug and pull in that type of dynamic. Also, acting on assumptions. He might hear or might just assume that his partner's cheating on him, and there's all kinds of things that could come up, but just assuming things and just expecting things could have tripped Ted up quite a bit in relationships, as well as a lack of communication. I mean, there'll be times when he would just leave and his girlfriend or other people would just not know where he was, and just also sometimes Ted would just do things without thinking about others people and their feelings and the regard that he had. Another thing is needing to learn to communicate his feelings, especially in a couple of his aspects in his chart. It even talks about how he might have that fear and feeling like he needs to hide his true feelings and desires because other people could have used that against him or could have bullied him for having feelings. And again, another thing too is letting go of that self-righteousness. This is again, that's something that needs to constantly be kind of reiterated due to the fact of the placement. A lot of people who have this, it's kind of one of those, it's like a stereotype kind of, right? People who have this placement oftentimes have that self-righteousness to them. So that is something that
I am seeing that Ted might have struggled with or feels like he needs in relationships. And in romance, a lot of the times these people really want a variety of people, different cultures, different situations, different sexual experiences. And also there's this obsessiveness that comes with this placement as well when it comes to being obsessive or possessive over a partner. Also, there could be a superficiality that comes with relationships. Having and keeping things shallow and casual usually is something that can happen with this type of a placement. Not always, but that is a pretty good portion or majority of people with this placement might show some of those traits. And this sometimes he can just be too direct with people. And that could be something that can kind of throw other people off or cause Ted issues down the line, being too direct sometimes, too blunt, not sugarcoating anything in his relationships, especially his romantic relationships. So Ted's goals, usually when you have placements like this, most of the time and think of it like this too. This is an outline of each individual. So if there's different people with different natal charts and I looked at it, but they both had Gemini and Sagittarius in their south and north nodes, that doesn't mean that they're going to be showing the same exact way. What it means is it's a guideline. Everyone's creative. It's just how they go about filling in that guideline, how they go about showing those needs or showing their way. And it's also because everybody is unique, so these are just kind of ways that I can say, hey, this is me generalizing the aspect of this person and kind of more or less what they've fallen into in a category. So just kind of keep that in mind as we're continuing down his chart. So his goals here is delivering and receiving messages with people, wanting to communicate with people, information, right? Needing to learn to balance information and intuition, and learning to balance logic and feeling that spontaneity, wanting to be spontaneous, wanting to have fun, but still being logical about it and not just going to one extreme or the other, learning to have that self-control and that impulse to make good decisions and not just doing things out of a whim. Listening to others and really hearing what people have to say. Sometimes he might just listen to just respond. And that's something that he could develop with this placement, is learning to be a little bit better at understanding people. Also, having this placement, he would have been a phenomenal teacher with certain things that he was knowledgeable about. He would actually be a great teacher. So, seeking advice, he would be great for asking for advice or vice versa, because a lot of the times people who have this placement are really educated. They're really good with words or writing. They are always open to new surroundings and new environments. A lot of times people with this placement too will ask a lot of questions, or will seek some kind of higher knowledge having this. So, and there's also this need to fit into society. So sometimes they might even, like I said, kind of feeling the need to kind of fit into society, right? Wanting to feel like they belong. And there's always this learning social cues so that they can have that social grace, right? They really care about feeling like they are important, feeling that people like them and that they enjoy them. And there's also something about maybe even studying body language or just being good with picking up social cues or learning about social cues, wanting to learn about how to improve socially. These are things that a lot of times people with these placements do focus on or are kind of aware of or know that that's where they need to work on. And now we're going to move into Chiron. For those of you guys who do not know what Chiron is, Chiron was a comet that appeared in 1970s. And at that time, that's when a lot of people started to realize that medicine started to become more prevalent. And if you go into Greek mythology, Chiron is the centaur that ended up getting hurt. There's a whole thing about it, but basically, he's also the god of medicine, alchemy, and a little bit of the arts because Apollo took him in. And anyway, it's basically the wounded healer. So he heals others, but he cannot heal himself because he got struck by a poisonous dart that basically would kill a god. So he basically was struggling to survive, and it was very painful. But he was a great healer, could heal everybody else but himself. And that's kind of the irony of Chiron. And to have Chiron in Scorpio, Chiron is already going to be a hard placement to have and anywhere in your chart because it's teaching you your deepest wounds. It's teaching you what scarred you before you were even born. This is something that you had in the womb, right? You were just, this is Chiron at its finest. It's its deepest wound that you yourself cannot heal. But when you help other people heal that same wound, in a weird way, it kind of helps eases the pain of this wound. So that's kind of Chiron in a nutshell. And Scorpio, the fact that it's there is already going to be a very traumatizing experience, perhaps to have that in with Ted. Seems to be able that he can get himself into situations that could be like very manipulative with people, right? And even sometimes they tell him how he should live his life and what he should be doing. So there could be a lot of control with this type of a placement where he feels like people are trying to control him. There could be, with people who have Chiron and Scorpio, now this is not everyone, but people with this placement might have experienced, physical or psychological abuse, might experience sexual traumas, having placements in Chiron and Scorpio. And not only that, but he could also have had a lot of violence or a lot of suicidal thoughts and tendencies with this placement. He can also get into serious, dangerous situations, and his marriage could have a lot of hard times in it as well, or there could be this hard time creating mutual trust with another person, having Scorpio in Chiron. And Chiron in his chart is in the 3rd house. So there could be a hard time trusting a sibling, feeling like maybe in some ways he could have felt overshadowed. I know Ted had a younger brother that nobody really talks about. And, there could have been issues there in the household or in learning, in environments, in school and stuff that could have led Ted to develop some ego lashes or issues, or feeling threatened in some way, or feeling maybe too emotionally sensitive at school and maybe feeling like he just didn't fit in or just nobody understood his ideas. These are things that could happen in the 3rd house, having that. Also, anywhere Chiron is in your chart, there is a sense of a disability there. There's a sense of something kind of handicaps you. And it's for him, it could have been speaking skills, not being able to could have had a speech problem, could have been quiet, could not talk very much. There's also, third house also can represent your hands. So maybe having some kind of hand issue, or feeling like, feeling kind of threatened in some way. There's a lot of things that could have gone wrong, right? If we want to look at the negative aspects of this. And there's also maybe feeling, again, not feeling understood, feeling that people don't care to understand him, feeling that some people go out of their way to misunderstand him, and might be having a hard time getting his point across to people, especially if they don't really care about what he has to say. And even the way that, let's say, because Ted was very intelligent, maybe the way that he even tried to communicate, maybe it was different than the other way people perceived it. So there could have just been a misunderstanding in communication, and that could have led problems with his teachers and even his classmates with having a placement like this. It's essentially, it makes you feel like you kind of stick out like a sore thumb. You feel like you don't belong wherever Chiron is placed. And there's this sense of uncomfortability being in the environment that Chiron is in. So there's a lot of lessons that are being learned with having Chiron in the third house here. Now, in Ted's life, he was born with a stutter. And that wouldn't surprise me, seeing that he has now had about 2 to 3 placements in his chart that indicated some form of an issue with speech or even a delay in speech. So the fact that he was born with the stutter, he was bullied a lot as a young kid for having that issue. And, I think that in a lot of ways that might be why Ted talks the way that he does in his interviews. He talks kind of slow, and it's like he pauses before talking again. And I'm wondering if that's because that might be his way of helping him not have a stutter in his speech. So I think Ted became very self-conscious of how he came across and how he talked. That I think that was could have been a insecurity for Ted all the way up till till he has passed on. So now we're going to be breaking into his MC. And for those of you guys who do not know, we have in the chart, there is 2 different types of lines. You have your AC, your DC, which is your ascendant and your descendant, and then your MC and your IC. Now that is going to be, your IC is all about your childhood, where you grew up, how you were raised, how you were born, the dynamic of the family, and where you fit into the family. And your MC is where you want to achieve before you die, what you strive for in career, and for how you will develop into this life. And basically what it is that you really want to achieve beforehand, because, a lot of times when people don't achieve that MC in their chart, they regret a lot of things in their life, not taking risks, not taking certain goals. It's something that we aspire to, right? It's so high up in our sky, in our chart, that it's something that our soul wants to experience. So when you have Taurus here, he knows how to be tough, and he must feel safe and secure in order to grow in this placement. So he has to learn to kind of take charge, and he has to learn to put in the hard work and dedication to get to where he wants to be and what position he wants. When it comes to jobs, he might be interested in art or music or even banking and finances, real estate. Those are great placements to have in that part of your chart, because people that usually have Taurus in the MC are really good in those areas. And whatever he chooses, he will be hands-on with it. A lot of times, Tauruses are very physical, so he'll be either using his hands a lot, whatever his work is, and also not only that, but he might also at times become very defensive with people about his work or about other people's opinions about the things and how his style of work is, because Taurus does have a little bit of that uniqueness to them. They want to feel unique. They want to feel like they can put their own spin on things. Tauruses can become very aesthetic with their work, and sometimes they can get a little bit attached to that as well. So him developing those skills of not taking other people's opinions too much to heart, maybe not allowing other people to have as much influence over him, especially when it comes to public persona or the working field. He needs to learn to develop those skills that it's like essentially growing a thicker skin, not being so afraid of what other people think, and also as well is learning to develop the skills that he actually loves, finding passion. And if he doesn't have passion in his work, then he's not going to get very far in his career. So He doesn't like change in his career either. A lot of times Taurus doesn't do well with change. It really doesn't. Taurus really genuinely enjoys having their space and having things be kind of similar and being kind of consistent. They don't like to see things changing up on them. And a lot of times Tauruses can be kind of considered rigid in their way of thinking, being kind of stubborn and bullheaded. And in a lot of ways, that could be how Ted was when it came to his career. And especially if he has an idea in his mind of how he needs to make money or how he needs to perform at work or how he perceives things to be, it's really hard for him to change course in that way because he has this idealized version of how things need to be instead of how they are. So there could be a little bit of that as well. A lot of people, too, and this is something that I find kind of interesting, that people who have the MC in Taurus, a lot of times people might look at them and think they have a lot of money or think they have a higher status than what they actually have. There's something about people with this placement that just give off an air of either authority or some kind of accomplishment, as if they accomplished so much when really they might not have, but they just give off that air to them. So we're going to go down into his IC now, and that is in Scorpio. And this makes a lot of sense. And this is kind of where we're going to break down a little bit more about his family dynamic. And again, there is not a whole lot, I feel like, has been talked about with his family, but every now and again, Ted does talk about his family. And when he does talk about them, he only says pretty positive things about his family. His home and his family life had a strong emotional hold on him. He had a lot of strong attachments in his childhood. There is this need to be alone sometimes and detox and relax from parental figures or things like that. Like sometimes he needed to kind of escape the household because there could be a suffocation issue there, right? Where sometimes maybe Ted felt like he was always being watched or monitored. Maybe feeling like sometimes he needed to escape the environment in order to feel like he can breathe. And not only that, but there can be a lot of private and psychological things that could have occurred in his family that could have been very intense. There could have been a lot of fear. There could have been a lot of loss in the household. Maybe, for instance, a lot of times people who have Scorpio in this placement, sometimes they grew up in a family household where money would fluctuate back and forth, or there was something that wasn't very consistent or wasn't very steady, or there's again a sense of underlying issues that no one addresses, feeling like you need to walk on eggshells, being afraid of being attacked, not knowing what to expect from a certain family member, right? Maybe this family member might react or act out. These things are stuff that can happen. And again, family secrets. Again, Scorpio is all about the hidden and what is truly lying under the depths. So it would not surprise me that Ted did not know who his real dad was. It wouldn't surprise me that Ted didn't know that his sister was his mother. All these different things that took place in Ted's life, it really wouldn't surprise me. And I think Ted really looked at his grandfather as his father, as that authority figure, and then finding out that that was his grandfather. I think it meant a lot to Ted to know who his real dad was, because I think Ted really did care about where he came from and why he is here and who was responsible for bringing him into this life. So there seems to be a lot of issues, deceit, lies, and a lot of attachments, I feel like, could have happened in Ted's household that really could have been very negative and may even had some positive aspects as well to it, but a lot of private things that maybe kept in the family. For instance, if there was somebody that abused a family member, what stays in the household, right? What happens in the household stays in the household. There could have been talked about, no, don't share what happens in the house. So maybe Ted felt like he wasn't safe to even talk about what would go on in his house. Things like that could happen with having the IC here in Scorpio. We're moving into the aspects of his chart. Now, this part gets a little more interesting because I feel like the aspects start to show and break down more characteristics, more traits, and more things that shaped him and developed Ted. So the aspects are very important of the chart. The other ones are, I feel like, are more summarizing, while the aspects give a little bit more depth to his character. So starting off, his sun conjuncts Mercury, and a conjunction is when it's at 0 degrees between the two planets. So that way, they are really communicating. There will be a strong mental energy when it comes to these two planets together. Pride can be something that is involved in his intellectual ways of thinking and communicating. He can be very prideful about his ideas and the way he communicates it. He can be hard for him to passively listen sometimes and absorb information, having this type of a placement. And his opinions are strong in this type of a placement. Usually people with having the sun conjunct Mercury are independent thinkers. And a lot of times they don't like it when people when people come across their ideas and beliefs and make fun of it or bruise their ego in any way, and not only that, but because people have this strong placement, sometimes they have, like I said, have a hard time respecting other people's ideas or listening to other people. And in return, a lot of times people don't want to do that for them. So that is something that could be a really hard thing for Ted to learn in this life. And not only that, but he can be very animated when he speaks. Moving his hands a lot, or, showing his eyes, like the expressions on his face or on his body. You can really see the emotions connected when it comes to this. And because the sun is so big and it's just so noticeable to have that, you notice that in his speech. You can't help but listen. You can't help but notice some of the things that he has to say. And another thing, too, is he can get very angry or upset when his feelings or feeling criticized or feeling like nobody's taking his ideas seriously. He might even sometimes act out due to having this type of a placement. And I just kind of think that's very interesting because, a lot of people say he's very charming, very charismatic, had a lot of charisma with the way that he would move and gesture. And a lot of girls were like really mesmerized. He had these beautiful blue eyes. And it's just like he seemed to get certain people to gravitate towards him. And it could be, too, because of the way that he would conduct himself. Moving into his moon semi-sextiles Venus. Now, and keep in mind, with these aspects, there is a lot of aspects to a person. And in this chart, I'm only doing the key ones that I feel like have stuck out to me, because there's no way I can go through and truly dissect one person's chart this thoroughly. So, yeah, keep that in mind as well. And so now we have the moon semi-sextiling Venus. And a semi-sextile is at 30 degrees between the moon and Venus. So in that point in time, the way that it's communicating is he can have this sweet nature about him. Because moon and Venus, there can be some form of harmony. And a semi-sextile is not a strong sextile, but there's still a nice light highlight of this is a positive thing that occurs in his life. He can win people over with his charm and his beauty. There is no need for him to get pushy psychologically or physically to get his way. And family and friends are important to him in a lot of ways. So having this type of placement, he can find ways. And again, I can't remember which placement it was earlier that we talked about, but one of the signs that he had, it even talked about how he can come off kind of non-threatening to people and can kind of get his way without actually using violence or force. So it's kind of interesting to think that, he was really able to really influence a lot of people. And this just kind of shows you a little bit about how he's able to do that. He has these aspects about him that just really draws a lot of people to him. And he does not do well with isolation away from other people, especially people that he cares about. One of the things I will say is he cannot live in dirty places. Many people would, some people, like for instance, if you have Pluto in the second house, a lot of those people can live in dirtier environments and be okay. But for him, he needed his environment clean, or he needed to feel like he could feel like he belonged there. Like he can't live in dirty spaces. Money can come to him very easily at times. Sometimes money can just fall into his lap randomly, right? He can socialize easy with people. I think Ted really did study people, and I think Ted really did know how to make people feel special. So I feel like um there's a lot of little things about him that was very likable to him. Now we're moving on here to the moon in conjunction with Mars. So again, this will be at 0 degrees, and that would give him this emotional, passionate nature to him. You know, he's full of life and can influence so many people around him, and it's almost like sometimes his energy can be contagious, right? It can be infectious being around somebody that has a lot of energy, that seems to be kind of where he's at. And sometimes he comes off like he wears his heart on his sleeve. Sometimes he can come off like he's a genuinely good guy. And in a lot of ways, I'm sure he did have a lot of positive qualities to him. Of course, given what he has done is a really messed up situation. But I can see how he was able to lure in victims. I could see how he was able to be liked by most people when he has placements that are very favorable to certain aspects of him. And he seemed like somebody who could be the life of the party, who would love to draw in that attention and get those strong emotions out of people. He also can be intense with his actions too, and he can take actions based on his emotions. So having that there, that means he can be very hot-tempered. He can also sometimes get in his way, right? Like if he has a clear goal and a clear action to do so, nothing and no one can stand in his way. And that is something that is prominent with this type of a placement. And you have to think Mars is violence. Mars does have a lot of negative connotations to it, because Mars is also known as being more confrontational of a planet. It's more prickly in that way, where more people are more willing to want to pick a fight with you. And to have it in that sense, it wouldn't surprise me if he was very manipulative too. Emotionally, being able to emotionally manipulate people and guilt trip people, or cause people to do things that goes against their own will for his benefit, would not surprise me. We also now go into Mercury in conjunction to Venus. And that again is another 0 degrees. And that just means that the planets are very close together. As you can tell, he has that stellium in his chart. So that also influences the way that each planet communicates and the way that it is. Now, the fact that it's at 0 degrees, keep in mind a conjunction can be a blind spot in your chart. Sometimes you're aware of it, but because they're so close and they're always connected and communicating in your chart naturally, it kind of sometimes makes you not see things versus like if it's across from you in opposition, right? Then you would have more like that 180 degrees. Then you would have more space to really look at it objectively. But because it's so close to you, it's such a natural thing that sometimes you can be blindsided by some of the negative behaviors that you can inhibit or experience in your life due to having this type of a placement. So he can be a visual learner and loves to read. And at a young age can be very interested in arts, politics, journalism, etc., right? Because having anything with Mercury and Venus is all about beauty, it's all about art, it's all about self-expression. Journalism is also a form, or even writing is a form of art. Getting into politics, Mercury is all about knowledge and gaining wisdom, but also all about the political aspects and having power and understanding laws, and a lot of different things that could have kind of fall into place here. And a lot of the times when you have Mercury in conjunction to Venus, you can be kind of submissive or passive at times, especially when it comes to close relationships. He could have been very passive. Instead of fighting, he just kind of let it happen and said whatever. This can also lead to a sense of indecisiveness and not knowing what he wants at times, maybe preferring to socialize than work, or wanting to joke around. So if when he's at work, he might not really be doing the job. He might just be there working and talking to people. So he can have a lot of different things like that can fall into play, having Mercury conjuncting Venus like that. Venus really wants the fun of the things and enjoyments. And so he might take up socializing as a good form of entertainment and as a form of something that he really truly enjoys doing. And another thing that he can do as well is internalize or rationalize his feelings. So that becomes such a close link that sometimes he might not actually know what he's feeling because he's rationalizing it so much. So there could be a lot of blind spots to how he's feeling. There could be a lot of blind spots to how he perceives his own self and his own wants and desires. And another thing too is people with this placement have a way with words. They're very good at communicating and writing things down and portraying things in a way that leads you to imagine stuff. Really good storytellers, really good at sharing anything that is kind of an artistic talent that person develops. And having that Mercury there with that Venus, it really can draw out a lot of different creative adventures in this person that a lot of people would never realize. So we are now going back into the Sun, and the Sun trines Saturn at this point in his chart. Now, when you see a trine is 120 degrees from each other. A trine can be a little bit of a, having to focus in on certain aspects of yourself. So he can see earlier recognition for his achievements, but he has to focus on the long-term goals rather than a part of his life, because sometimes, he can suffer for it because he expects to see achievements right away, or he expects to see praise earlier on than what he might get. So he has to learn to take, he can have taken on other people's responsibilities and adding additional stress to himself a lot of the times with this type of placement. He can take on responsibilities for his job and other projects that might not have been his thing. His father figure could have showed him that there are no shortcuts in his life. And of course, maybe he would go against that because even knowing about his South Node, learning to take those shortcuts, he might have tried to do stuff like that when other people told him not to. So having that trine there could have, especially with Saturn, is really teaching him to slow down, take responsibility, learn to shoulder the burdens for others, learn to not take shortcuts. Every time you take a shortcut, he's going to have to learn from that. So there's a lot of things there's a little bit of a tension there in this placement. So there could always be that sense of maybe suffering or feeling like, life is not fair. Why is everything a burden? There could be some aspects to that as well. And his moon trines Saturn too. So I find that very interesting because, he can have a strong intuition that could guide him through life, but he could also ignore it. And so he's choosing, it's all in how you choose it, right? And not only that, but he comes off as cold, like having a cold demeanor when he's under stressful situations. He can come off super cold and detached. And, people with this placement oftentimes are very psychic, and a lot of times it's inherited through family. Not always, but people with this placement, sometimes if they had mediumship in their family, they could develop it in this life too. So it's just all about family bloodline or past incarnations could have influenced influenced parts of him in his chart. Also, there's a sense of independable nature, and having him gain respect
from public, right? Like wanting to be seen as independent, wanting to be seen as somebody to respect, somebody to take seriously. And, people with this placement, loyalty to family is a huge one for this placement. And wanting that respect and self discipline is something that he really needed to learn to develop as well with this placement, because it's almost as if he demands and wants love and respect, but may have a hard time giving it back. So that is something that can happen with Moon trining Saturn here. So we also now go into Uranus, and this is an opposition to the moon. An opposition is 180 degrees apart from each other, so it's actually across from each other on the chart. And this is usually a little bit of an easier placement when it comes to understanding each placement, like understanding each planet and what it comes into and brings, because there's enough space between the two to really communicate. So at a younger age, he could have found it easier to develop personal relationships and friendships while growing up if he chose to take that route. Now, of course, it depends on everyone's placements and if there's any type of others that could have indicated his life. But a lot of the times, people with this placement has at least one or two strong people or strong connections that they have developed in their childhood and can have a hard time making or keeping a sustainable relationship. You know, there can be a lot of clashing between old and new relationships in his life. And there's this inner life that he might feel is like a battlefield. You know, when you, so inside his mind, you know, he might battle himself and might have a hard time being a friend to himself. So he can feel like a part of him is being torn apart on the inside and might feel this tendency to have a mental and emotional stresses in relationships with others because he's experiencing that internally inside himself at all the time, because having this placement, you know, there's this need for like going out and being crazy, but also there's this need to also see the stability. So there's a little bit of instability when it comes to the emotional aspect with this in their chart. So to have Jupiter in conjunction to Venus, again, that is at 0 degrees with the conjunction, he can be the center of attention with this placement. Jupiter brings in blessings. It is a very positive planet. It is it's a beneficial planet. Same with Venus. So his taste in music or his taste in food can be refined. He can have this attention on him at all times. There's something about his appearance, or there's something about him that seems like he has money or that he seems to be successful. There's an air of luck or an air of abundance around him. With people with this type of placements too, a lot of people, you know, they come off very attractive and can come off as generous and peaceful at times and can seem like somebody who is just really good at ending disputes and doesn't seem to want to fight. You know, there's this sense of almost like people around them feel like they don't really want to argue with him. They don't really want to pick a fight with him, you know, because he might come off as somebody who doesn't care to be argumentative, or that he might come off as agreeable at times with people, even if he doesn't necessarily agree, you know. So a lot of the times too with people with this placement, you know, he might even be around agreeable people, but there is this sense of needing self-control, and can be a problem leading into addictions, though, or greed, or dreaming of being rich with this type of a placement. So sometimes there's this greediness or an addiction to things because Venus and Jupiter are like the good feel planets. So sometimes he can take that and get carried away with doing things out of feeling like you want it or need it. So now we go into Mars, and this is trine Saturn. I noticed that a lot of his placements are trine Saturn, so I find that very interesting because, again, there seems to be some kind of trip up when it comes to Saturn in his chart, meaning just that
feels like it's kind of like a focal point here, where he has to learn to become more responsible, has to learn to achieve things without taking shortcuts, without taking violence or actions that could go against what he's ultimately trying to achieve. And so to have this type of placement, people can find his tone and his voice or even his appearance attractive. He can manage risks as well as being dependable and resourceful. He can be a good manager in positions. And he also loves to be the boss. He loves to boss people around. When you have Mars trying Saturn like this, people usually come off kind of as a leadership role or kind of come off as somebody who could be a boss or is somebody of higher authority. Also, a lot of times people who have this placement oftentimes are obsessed with knives or firearms due to this kind of aspect, metal. Anything that's affiliated with metal, like any type of weapon like that, is something that they like, which I find is really weird to say, but it is true. And not only that, but having this placement could also explain why he has love for politics and making a sense. It makes sense for this placement that, again, politics or being a lawyer or something to do with law kind of is, again, kind of prominent in his chart. But yeah, a lot of times people with this Mars in training in Saturn, they could become kind of violent or have violent tendencies or just get drawn to weapons because Mars is all about war and weapons, and having this type of placement, it kind of makes sense here. Mars is in opposition to Uranus. And the Mars in opposition to Uranus, again, opposition is 180 degrees. Mars and Uranus, Mars is already a unhinged planet. It's already kind of hard. You can't quite expect what you're going to get from Mars. But then Uranus is also that, random. You never know how Uranus is going to play out. Good things, bad things happen in Uranus all the time. There's always constant change. So to have this, he can take a lot of risks and seek out thrills through his actions. He needs to feel alive and he needs to do things that bring him a sense of rush, right? And another thing too is he attracts people that are also adventurous. He seems to attract people that are very unique or quirky or different in some way. And he can be kind of a reserved type of person with this type of placement. He can kind of piss people off. And sometimes sometimes people can give him a hard time with this type of a placement. Sometimes he might see other people being threatened by him or just feeling like they need to attack him or vice versa. So also having this type of placement here, there's a strong need of reaction to feeling freedom, right? When his freedom is feeling threatened, he can feel this strong reaction inside of him with this type of placement, and also, again, he enjoys creating sometimes arguments. So it's weird because there feels like there's different aspects of him, right? Well, one, when you saw the his Venus conjuncting Jupiter, he can come off as not being argumentative, or again, he's around people that are less likely to be argumentative. But to have that Mars in opposition with Uranus, it's almost as if, he truly enjoys it, though. He really does enjoy fighting with people and being in the opposite stance with another person. There seems to be a joy or thrill in getting a reaction out of people. And sometimes he acts without thinking about the consequences with this type of placement, because sometimes he's so gun-ho on doing what he wants to do that he kind of forgets the bigger picture of things at times, or the actions lead to having issues down the road. So his Mars trines Pluto. So again, a trine is 120 degrees apart from each other. And this aspect can affect his ego, right, and can leave a mark on the world. So his partnerships mean a lot to him with this type of placement. He He's always seeking out finding a better partner, a strong partner. He needs somebody who can handle his intense personality. A lot of times people with Mars in trine Pluto, they search out for people who can handle them, or who can take I guess their aggression, or can take the outbursts that they might have. Because Mars and Pluto, they already are kind of a confrontational planet, it makes sense that he is more drawn to people that seem to be able to be independent and carry themselves and are strong in themselves. Because having this placement, he might have a tendency of not wanting to have people rely on him, not wanting people to put, just use, I guess how I want to put it is, he doesn't necessarily want people to rely on him and him alone. He wants to know that his partner has the independency, because he might not be able to emotionally withstand being somebody's crutch, or being that emotional support to rely on. And sometimes he can feel like he's being threatened at times, and feeling personally attacked due to having this type of placement. So now we're entering into Mars, and it's going to be in opposition of his North Node. Now this is 180 degrees from the North Node in Mars, and he has a hard time asking people for help, or having a hard time getting his needs met, because he has a hard time asking. Now this placement can help him take action towards his goals, and can help him with the feeling of this inner intense and frustration that he feels internally. This is a placement that is teaching him to get out of it. It's teaching him to grow. So he can be kind of one of those people who are always in the urge to fight, right? If you've ever heard of like the fighting spirit, like people who always, they're like a warrior at heart. Sometimes people have that with this type of a placement. And not only that, but sometimes he can develop a way to suppress aggression, right? In a lot of situations, maybe he will suppress his aggression, and then of course it comes out in other ways. And obviously it came out in multiple different horrible ways, but this is kind of showing in another way that he kind of does keep suppressing a lot of negative anger and issues that later he has to act out. And to have his Mars attached to certain planets that help him act out on that anger, it wouldn't surprise me that he became such a violent, notorious killer that he's known for today. So also, people with this placement are really good at being an entrepreneur. And if he really wanted to, he probably could have found ways to become an entrepreneur. But unfortunately, Ted never took that route. He could have a lot of stamina and could strive to make goals with this type of a placement. There's something about this type of placement that kind of urges you to keep reaching for goals and to keep on improving. There's like this feeling of needing to keep moving forward, needing to keep going on. So there's a lot of things that are very positive with this as well. But one thing I will say, having this placement can lead to a lot of impulsive and rash behaviors, and can lead to temptation and causing a lot of different accidents or a lot of different things to occur, because of not thinking clearly when being upset. But also, having this placement, there is room for contemplation before taking action. Before he takes action, usually he is pretty good at being able to calculate it before just doing it, even though he does appear as if he's just reacting to react. So now we're going into Saturn here in conjunction to Pluto. Again, we are back at that 0 degrees due to that stellium that he has. And in this one, he could have suffered hardships in childhood. This would be a more harder aspect in his childhood, where his parents could have been poor or very strict with him and his experiences growing up. And not only that, but also he had to learn to grow up quickly with somebody with this type of placement, which could cause physical, mental, or emotional disability in him, or instability that he could be experiencing having having this type of a placement. And he had to learn patience and had to learn to become resourceful. A lot of people with this type of an aspect in their chart had to learn to be good at surviving, good at being adaptable to their environments. And also, there's always this fear of failure that looms over them with this type of placement because there had been so many restrictions or so many things put on their plate that they were expected to achieve or do that could have led them to feeling that they're afraid of failure. Because people with Saturn squaring Chiron, there's that fear of that protection and that vulnerability and wanting to push people away. Also, there's that sense of feeling very weak at times and having a tendency to ignoring his own feelings until they get out of hand. So anger is his defense mechanism. And a lot of the times too, even his ex-girlfriend and her daughter have stated, Ted never got angry with us. He never showed any violent tendencies. Well, that could have been where he was suppressing some of that anger, some of that frustration, because he would take it out on his victims. So he would just use a lot of that anger and all those things that he had and use that to help him alleviate some of that stress and some of that pain. So his way of going through Chiron, maybe doing that against another person was his way of feeling relief for a short period of time, but then having that urge to do it again, I think really did drive Ted to be what Ted was today. So we have now the ascendant squaring the sun. And so again, 45-degree angle here. He has been in a lot of hardships in childhood and even maybe perhaps injustices in childhood, being blamed for things that he never did, maybe being seen as somebody who he really wasn't. Things like that could have really impacted and changed the way that Ted maybe even perhaps viewed himself. And as well as there was limitations and rules about how he can act. And so maybe in a lot of ways, Ted felt like he couldn't be himself. He may have suffered physical or emotional abuse as a child from a parent, or an early setback can lead to low self-esteem. And not only that, I find it interesting because in interviews, Ted has stated he was never violent, that he never been physically abused or emotionally abused or sexually or anything like that. But, I do kind of question how much of Ted's childhood did he really remember. I wondered if he suppressed stuff. I wondered if, maybe Ted experienced things, maybe not with his family, but it's always possible for like a family friend or, some kind of situation. But even if that wasn't the case, there had to have been something in his childhood that set him back a little bit with his earlier development stages. I do believe that. So others might be able to sense a negative energy about him with this type of a placement. Because of being ridiculed enough and having all these things, it can kind of leave a person feeling and looking kind of dense in their energy. So some people might have picked up some of Ted's negative energy and might have thought he was a psycho or could have thought something off about him and not know why. And it could just be due to having a placement like this. Oftentimes, he can suppress his fears and his shadow side, so that way he doesn't even think of himself as a violent person, but those violent tendencies kind of come out and react. So he needs to learn to put himself out there more and be more self-expressive. And again, there's something about Ted feeling like he couldn't really open up to people, that he really couldn't communicate to people, that he felt like he really couldn't be his true self to people. And I feel like he was kind of afraid of the way society would view him and the way that he how he kind of was in general. Also, growing up with this type of placement, society rules and age and experience teaches him how far he can push boundaries with others and in situations. So this is a placement of development where you can see whether or not, he would test boundaries with people. He would understand what was right, what was wrong, what was okay, what wasn't okay, and how far he could take it. To have the AC now, his AC trines the moon. So, of course, a trine is 120 degrees. He shows his true feelings quite easily in relationships and quite early on in relationships as well. Family is very important to him, and he could always see himself as a dad with a type of placement like this. He really was family oriented, which I think really is what kind of is scary about Ted, because of how horrible he treated his victims and how brutal he was. Yet you still see this side of him that he really wanted a family, that he really wanted to like he was very protective of those that he felt were deemed worthy of being in his family. And you can see that he really did value certain relationships in his life. And with this type of placement as well, is you can attract a lot of women with this placement, especially if you're a man. He may prefer to be around sensitive men types. If he was to be around men, he would prefer men that were more sensitive or a little bit more feminine in nature. He can form a lot of maternal nature with others, right? Sometimes he might even come off very genuine, very caring, wanting to, and also I feel like Ted enjoyed being around people of the feminine energy, right? People that were nurturing, maternal, more understanding and a little more nicer to him, because I think that perhaps he might not have really received that much growing up. Also, another thing is that he can form close bonds but even still be a very private person. So even people that closest to him might not really know much about him, because he prefers to be kind of quiet and kind of in the dark, and doesn't want people to know a whole lot about him. So that is something that is also interesting. Now we're going into his AC, and that is squaring Mercury. And of course, that is a 45-degree angle. So giving him a sharp mind and a curiosity, and even a creative way of explaining things on an intelligent level, is something that a lot of people with the AC squaring Mercury oftentimes have. He can be smooth with his words, and he's really easily witty, quick with his thoughts, quick on his thinking, always finding things to do to pass time. He might have had lots of multiple interests, and also not only that, but he's great at entertaining other people. He can be very disagreeable with people though, oftentimes, and could have a tendency to preach at times. So a lot of the times people with this placement also love to debate others and get to his point across even. He needs to avoid gossip and spreading rumors about others, because sometimes he can be quite talkative and very opinionated and can be a trickster, which could lead to him having other issues down the line. Also, he needs to learn that his limits. He needs to learn his limits when it comes to socializing, or even bullying or teasing other people in a careless manner could also eventually ruin or destroy his reputation if he is not careful with this type of a placement. So also going back into it here, we also have the AC squaring Venus. And this placement can cause him to be sexually attractive and aesthetically pleasing to look at for most people. Other people might find him to be excellent at social skills, and a lot of people might love being around him. There's something strong about him in a way that makes people think that he might have a lot of luxury items, or that, let's say if he's wearing a $20 shirt, he might wear it as if it's $300. There's something about him that seems comfortable, that seems like he has a lot of luxury. Again, there's something about him that appears expensive, or appears that he's very knowledgeable or successful in some way, which I'm sure Ted would play up as well, given his personality. So a lot of things as well to note, that people with this type of placement, usually they prefer to have comfortable homes, and they like to live in areas of in nice areas of their home. Another thing too is that they can be very picky and very choosy about partners, and can be very picky about people, places, and things. And also, one thing that I will say about this placement is most people are known to be lovers and not a fighter because of the energy that Gemini brings to this placement. A lot of times, as ironic as it is, a lot of people see them not as so much as a threat. So now we're going back into here the MC, and this is in a quincunx or an in conjunction to the moon. So a quincunx is 150 degrees. And what this does is this gives him a little bit of an extra sensitivity to his emotions. And not only that, but his mother could have influenced his career choices and can be passive or submissive in settling his goals, right? In setting his goals, he can be very passive or submissive because it might not even be his goals. You know, he might have at a young age have had, and there's something here about this placement in particular, having a strong influence with women, meaning that a woman or a mother or a grandmother or somebody that was of feminine energy, really wanting to control Ted, wanting to see certain aspects of Ted, wanting to change his career, wanting to make him be a certain way. He also enjoys helping people with this type of placement, and he feels more comfortable being around women than men. And not only that, but he feels comfortable in groups of people, as well as he could work well in public. He can come off very warm and caring and sympathetic, but that can be an image in the public eye. He can come and make people think that he is this great guy because he can put on such a good image, and it's almost like he can fit in and make anybody believe that he belongs there with them. Having this kind of a placement. It's kind of almost like a little hidden aspect that gives you a little bit of an edge in life. That's kind of what this placement does here. So now we're moving on to the MC opposition in Mercury, and this one is kind of interesting because he takes a lot of interest in activities. He probably reads a lot and would ask a lot of questions as a child. He could have been taught to do well in school, and his parents had a huge influence over his opinions and his beliefs, and most likely he enjoyed practical jokes and mocking and mimicking others. He questions others and himself and can have formed a narrow-minded thinking when it comes to jobs, people, career, being able to kind of profile people. He also may have started to share his own ideas and thoughts and his home or at school, and could have been ridiculed or judged for it. As well as a lot of people with this placement have very interesting hobbies and places that they have gone. And another thing too is people with this placement oftentimes have been associated as being high-strung or very anxious, and maybe having a hard time fully being in the present moment. What is also very interesting with this placement as well is a lot of politicians have this placement or are more likely to go into the careers of public speaking or campaigning in politics or having some kind of government institution as a job or as a hobby. So now we're moving on to the MC in opposition to Venus. And of course, in opposition is at 180 degrees. And this shows that he could have grown up in a kind of loving home, right? He could have been raised to have a more healthy self-image and a sense of security. And it is possible that Ted grew up in a loving home and a loving environment, but then maybe would go outside of his home and got bullied and ridiculed. Those are all strong possibilities. But I will say that, I do believe in some aspects, Ted's household wasn't always that bad. I'm sure he had good times and I'm sure he had bad times. But I will say that definitely, growing up, he had a taste for beauty and wanting things to look aesthetically pleasing. Most likely had a clean and uncluttered home.
usually very comfortable in his environments, and he also could have been very social and entertaining others at a young age. He also likes his privacy in his home, and at times hates it when other people would come over. Needing a more cleaner environment in order to feel at his very best is a lot of the times what people would feel having this type of placement. Cleanliness is important to people with this placement. Having a good home is important to people with this placement. Being able to have space and room to entertain people is important with people in this type of placement. So in a lot of ways, he could have been a very good guest. He could have been somebody that could really, like if you were getting invited to his home, could have had multiple drinks or multiple things to offer you. Like that seems like the hospitality would be a little bit better having this type of placement. To have his MC in opposition to Jupiter, again 180 degrees here, he had a great childhood and his parents were supportive, and usually kept good company at the home. He can be a very positive person at times. And also, a lot of the times people with this placement love to continue the traditions of the family and love to feel that emotional support and closeness with people as well. He even tried to reach out for his fullest potential before settling down. So a lot of times people with this placement, they want to achieve before they feel like they are worthy to settle down and have a better life for themselves. He could have dreamed of traveling overseas or moved to places that he felt would have bettered his life in some way. His values and his beliefs oftentimes are associated with the home and should be a strong connection to his childhood and how well he felt safe in his own environment growing up. From the outside world stresses, he could have most likely lived in a home where there was more space for him to move around in. He could get in accident at times, or even sometimes he would accumulate possessions from other family members due to having this placement. Home can sometimes become restrictive and could also have a lot of boundaries in his household. So Ted could have had a lot of people maybe telling him what he can and can't do, what is okay and what isn't okay. So there is a sense of feeling this need to feel kind of like he needed to have a safe environment in order for him to really thrive in. So we also have here his MC squaring Saturn, so that's at 45 degrees, and this can create a lack of security as a child. And his parents could have struggled financially, and he might have felt isolated in school and had a difficulty relating to people on an emotional level. And this could also have led to him not having a good sleeping schedule, maybe feeling sadness. There could have been a sense of self-harm or depression, or even anxiety and drug abuse a lot of times are affiliated with this placement. This one is a very hard one for people to work through because there's a sense and a need to build that self-worth again and that recognition of yourself, because there have been things and stuff in his life that could have brought him down and broken down parts of his ambition over time having this type of placement. And honestly, people with this placement too, they need to leave their homes in order to figure out who they really are as a person too. They need to break out of the nest in order to get to see his fullest potential, because sometimes living in their household could hinder them having this type of placement. Even at times of grief, he might not have gotten the emotional support that he needed from people around him that closest to him since he was a child. So he looked for emotional support maybe elsewhere besides close relatives or family members. That is a huge possibility, or just have never turned to anyone for help. But there's definitely this sense of not feeling like he can turn to help or can ask people for help. So now his MC squares Pluto. And again, 45-degree angle, this can be a very rough one to have because, again, Pluto is all about that power dynamic and your MC is all about the public eye and career. This can be insanely driven him to experience and shape the way he views himself, whether that's good or bad. But depending on his childhood experiences, and his mother has a huge influence over his life in this part, an aspect of his chart. So his parents
parents could be overly emotional, interfering, or even sometimes downright cruel to him, and an early trauma could have caused him to have a hard time connecting on an emotional level with other people. And even past life experiences could have impacted on how he is in his life as a child. So growing up, his childhood can make him have this complexity in his personality and this inner intense life where he might be fighting with himself back and forth because he might have conflicting beliefs due to being in environments where he was being told what to do, feeling like he had to listen, and feeling all these different types of events, and even could have experienced loss or trauma at such a young age, having this kind of placement. He may have difficulties really understanding his own emotions, especially when it comes to him when he was younger and when he was in small groups of friends or people. He might not know why he behaved the way he behaved, or why things happened to him the way that it happened. So as you can kind of see, these are a lot of the aspects that do kind of help make up Ted Bundy, and a little bit about himself, and just more about who he is as a person. So hopefully a lot of this made sense to you guys and you enjoyed this so far. I am excited to start this series, and I hope that you guys are too. Hopefully this helped you guys get a better view of Ted Bundy, and hopefully this will help kind of understand maybe why sometimes gruesome and horrible things happen. Obviously, this is not a justification, but I can kind of understand a little bit more about Ted Bundy in this. And even when he was going to court, he actually became his own lawyer, and he even ended up marrying a girl that was a huge fan of Ted and had a daughter while in prison. So he still was obsessed with the idea of having a family and having a child of his own before he got executed. So Ted was always really trying to gain some things that I think he felt like he never could have. And even the judge at the end of the trial even said to Ted, "I hate to have to do this, you had so much potential that you wasted." And even the judge felt bad putting Ted behind bars, because Ted was just so likable, he was just so charming, that even other people didn't want to see Ted go behind bars, regardless of the heinous crimes that he had committed. So I just find that very interesting, that he was at the end of the day just a man, but also had a lot of good qualities as well as negative qualities. So that concludes Ted Bundy natal chart reading. I hope that this helped you guys, and I hope you guys enjoyed it and found this entertaining. Have a great and wonderful day. Thank you. Bye.